Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, signed.
So we are now in public session. I just remind people that this is being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, and so welcome anyone who's watching online. So if you could mute your mobile phones, and just to remind you that photography and recording is not allowed. Okay, so we're just going to proceed with the agenda then. So we'll say we have apologies for Sinead if she's not able to make it. Just to check, have anybody got any declarations of interest they'd like to declare? No? Okay. Okay, so in terms of chairperson's business, just a quick matter, members, and that was just to say that the Clerk, Deputy Chair, and I met with the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse recently there, and she really wanted to highlight the impending end of the redress process in 7 months. She said that people are still coming forward, still insufficient awareness, and that there's a proportion of people who don't fall within her remit, but who are victims and survivors of historical abuse, and we need to find a way to support them. And she had suggested that we look at what they have done in the Republic of Ireland around prevalence studies. So if you are okay, if you're in agreement, I would like to write to the department on your behalf to seek an extension of the Redress Board, set out plans for ask them to set out their plans for a communication plan to improve uptake and consider commissioning research into sexual abuse prevalence in Northern Ireland. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we will probably schedule another session with Fiona Ryan once we get the response back, and possibly then look to our own committee motion on this. Okay, I also thought it would be useful to get raised to look at the research and processes in the Republic, and also to engage with the Interdepartmental Working Group on this issue. And then just finally, before I bring our guests, our first panel in, it's just to advise that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister met with the Deputy Chair and I before the ministerial statement in the Chamber on the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls framework. Okay, so draft minutes are in your pack. In terms of matters outstanding, there's one around the consultation on mother and baby institutions consultation, and we'll come back to that. We had talked about bringing those people with lived experience back, but we have been advised that the first reading and possibly second reading of the bill itself will happen before Christmas, so we will have an opportunity to engage before that. So if people are in agreement, we'll wait until that time. Okay. All right. Okay. So on with today's business.
Chair, just to
go ahead.
Are members happy enough that we send that to the consultation, the response for the committee, or would they like to discuss it next week?
The consultation that was in your pack, was it in this pack?
Last week.
In last week around our consultation to respond to that?
Just a summary of evidence.
Okay. Content for us just to forward it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, you're very welcome today. So we have the Independent Commission on Reconciliation and Information Recovery to give us oral evidence. So members, page 17 of your pack, you'll find the clerk's brief. Page 19, you'll find the briefing paper from the Commission. And so I'd just like to welcome everybody from the Independent Commission on Reconciliation and Information Retrieval. So we have Louise Ward-Hunter. Okay, sorry, doctor.
No, definitely not a doctor.
Oh, sorry, the other end. Sorry, Dr. Leslie Carroll. Sorry, Sir Declan Morgan, Peter Sheridan, and Dr. Leslie Carroll. So you're all very welcome. Thank you so much for your briefing paper, very informative. And if you would like to go ahead with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and good afternoon to all the members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. We're delighted to be here with you to brief you on the work of the Commission. We know that you're already in receipt of the briefing paper, and it's to bring you up to date on what we have achieved since we became operational when we launched on the 1st of May. And we've been working very hard over the past 96 working days to achieve what we have so far, and I'm going to go into that in just a moment. You, Chair, have already outlined who is around the table, so I'll not go down the introduction route again, other than say, of course, Declan is the Chief Commissioner, Peter is the Commissioner for Investigations, and Leslie is Assistant Commissioner. Very much on support, engagement and victims and survivors, and I will come back to that. I know we have a short period of time, so I want to make best use of it in how we brief you. I think it's very important to say at the outset that we recognise that there are and have been mixed feelings about the Legacy Act, and indeed how the Commission has come into being. And it is also important, I believe, that we recognise that the Commission has come a long way in a very short space of time and is absolutely resolute in establishing a new and different approach to answering the questions of our past. Since my arrival at the Commission, I've been with the Commission just under a calendar month. I've been deeply impressed by the passion, the drive, the professionalism and the expertise of the team, all focused on that shared purpose to establish the truth regarding each terrible loss of life or injury. So I'll just very briefly set out for you, and perhaps as a little bit of a recap, how we actually work. So you will have seen, I'm sure, last week a good deal of commentary in the media about our headline figures and when we published our accountability update, which was last Monday. So our work in a nutshell. In our first 4 months of operations, 85 people have come to the Commission looking for answers to their questions about a death or a serious injury related to the Troubles. As of the 31st of August, as per our report, 10 requests for investigation had formally been made, and 8 of those have now been accepted and progressed through to the investigation stage. None have been ruled out as ineligible. We're very clear that our approach to the Commission is about the person. We want to be careful not to treat these individuals coming through, particularly given the very particular backdrop and their experiences, as just case numbers. And that's why we won't be giving a running commentary on the people who've approached us, but we will absolutely give regular reports in line with our values of being accountable and open. And it is important, I would say to members of the committee, that we strike the right balance on that. So our approach, just to recap briefly, we have a 3-staged approach to investigations. The focus is on conducting investigations using a trauma and resiliency informed approach. Leslie will talk more about that later in questions if you wish. And that's very much about putting victims and survivors at the heart of what we do. So what happens when an individual approaches Commission? Well, they would meet with the case support team, that's the first stage, and they'd be accompanied through their journey with us, with that single point of contact right the way through the team. And the timing of a formal request for an investigation to the Commission is very much in the hands of that individual who comes to the Commission. It's important, of course, that they have the time, the space and the information on which to make an informed decision. And Leslie, who leads our work on this support stage, can expand on that further. The next stage then is for an investigation to be carried out, and we have different approaches depending on the circumstances of the case. And these investigations incorporate good practice that is to be expected of an ECHR convention compliant process and investigations. And it's very much about bringing the individual, the person, the inquirer with us, the requester with us at every step of the way. And in some cases, the Commission will refer the case to a prosecutor for a decision on whether to bring criminal proceedings. Peter Sheridan is the Commissioner for Investigations and no doubt can expand on our approach to information recovery when we get into the questions. And the final stage then, or the final phase, goes to the Chief Commissioner, and Sir Declan is responsible for the production of a report recording the findings of the investigation, and these findings would be based on the scrutiny of the evidence presented, and in most cases will be made on the balance of probabilities. And the report is required to go through a process during which representations can be made before publication, and a statement from victims and survivors can be published alongside the report, should they wish that to be the case. Information recovery permits the Commission to give the unvarnished truth, and that's a phrase that you will hear us say many times, about the Troubles, the conflict. And that's to respect those who suffered and were killed, to validate the memories of loved ones, and to establish objective and evidence-based narratives about the past. And in our view, that is key in promoting reconciliation. So why is the design in itself that I set out to you important? Well, the stages are deliberate. They've been carefully designed and indeed consulted on, and they were published earlier in the year in July in our operational design framework. And in that first stage alone, I think we are defining ourselves by working in a different way. So what you will hear from Leslie is we do take that time with requesting individuals, discussing and explaining how the Commission works. That's absolutely essential so that we can build a relationship with individuals. We begin to carry out the exploratory work to understand their case better, and we speak with them to understand what questions they may want the Commission to investigation to answer. And again, we can come back to that during our conversation with you today. In terms of accountability, To whom are we accountable and how? Well, in terms of how the Commission as an organisation operates, we are guided by our 3 core principles: compliance with the European Convention on Human Rights, respect for the principles of the 1998 Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and focus on providing useful information to those affected by the Troubles. And we have 5 values, and I'm happy to come back and articulate those to you. I am acutely aware of time. We've set recruitment principles, so it's reflecting public sector best practice. So we make appointments based on merit after a fair and open competition. And again, this is all available on our website. We have 7 commissioners, of whom 4, the majority, are non-executive, and they bring a wealth of experience and robust scrutiny to our work. And we also have an external assurance group, and that's responsible for advising Peter in his role as Commissioner for Investigations, and indeed the wider Commission, on operating policy and practices. We're designated under Section 75. We have prepared an equality scheme that awaits approval from the ECNI and a disability action plan. But ultimately, we will be judged on our delivery, on our ability to support people properly on their journey towards finding out the truth, reflecting the questions they have, and I certainly am committed, along with colleagues, to deliver for as many people as we can. We do recognise that there is a wider context, and Chair, I don't wish to over talk, so may I just ask, can you give me another 2 or 3 minutes just to set that out, yes, if you're content. Broader context, first of all, Northern Ireland Executive. The Commission is an independent public body. We're not funded by the executive budgets, but we are, of course, determined and committed to working effectively with Executive Office colleagues and others. We know that we have a contribution to make around the new strategy for victims and survivors of the Troubles, and we look forward to seeing that published. And while we weren't operational at the time that the strategy was developed and consulted upon, the language in that, a trauma-informed society that addresses the needs of victims and survivors, completely aligns with the mission of the Commission. So we look forward to being in support of that. And equally, we resonate with the programme for government to make sure that our piece is meaningful. Clearly, the position with the UK government following the general election, the new government has abandoned a very important aspect which affects the legislation underpinning the Commission, and that's the grounds of the appeal relating to conditional immunity. The new government has abandoned that. The new Secretary of State, Hilary Benn, has confirmed that the government has confidence in the ability of the leadership of the Commission to deliver justice, accountability and information, and that was affirmed recently as reported at the British Irish Association conference. And you'll also be aware at that conference that Hilary Benn signalled a new chapter in the UK-Ireland relationship and working with all. And all of those comments, I think, align totally with the values. The Secretary of State has also recognised that whilst achieving consensus on legacy issues will be difficult, the government certainly plans to consult with interested parties to find a practical way forward which commands broad support across communities. And with respect to the Irish government, the Commission has reached out on a number of occasions. We continue to seek engage with the Irish government, and we know that progress certainly can be made. And when investigating, the Commission will do all it can to get the information that is needed to shed light and give that the shed light on the questions that are required. I think a couple of points before I close.
Quickly, please, because we did get your paper.
Thank you. One is that the Dillon and others judgment has indicated that the Commission is independent and capable of carrying out investigations which are compliant with the ECHR, and indeed that the Secretary of State has welcomed, has said that he wishes to strengthen the Commission. So I think hopefully that will give you a fair enough update on where we are. The issue of our independence, I do not doubt, will be something that will come up in questions, and I think Sir Declan would be best placed to articulate our answer to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've just got so much to get through today. Sorry for rushing you.
Fine.
But thank you for your papers again, and I just do want to acknowledge that you are an independent commission. Yep. You were invited here today. You didn't have to come, so we do appreciate your time, but we thought it was a really good opportunity because we do work with victims and survivors of the Troubles here as a committee. So I would like to set that out from the start. So So just possibly an easier one to start off with, and that's around the accountability piece, the values, ethics and standards section. You talk about the ability to operate fairly for all, and there have been, as we know in Northern Ireland, sometimes it can be very much a binary. Everybody looks at things through a binary prism, and they get more inquests, they get more of this, we get less. So how are you going to ensure that the programme of work is actually balanced and that it's transparent as to how you are prioritising your work?
Well, that allows me to speak to the issue of first of all, about the 5 values which underpin how we approach things which relate to integrity, respect, openness, impartiality and accountability. And I think critically that it's that impartiality. The 85 families and individuals who have come to us are I won't rehearse how they're stepping through that process. It is vital that the process looks at each, and I think Leslie can pick up on that, that each family or each requester is given the respect that they can and given the information they can as to what the Commission can actually do for them. In regard to the issue of, well, how will we stand accountable? This is the critical issue about our independence and our accountability in reaching those standards that I set out, indeed that we are compliant with the ECHR. And I think maybe Sir Declan might speak. Maybe.
I mean, it's probably more for Peter, but the truth is that we have people who have already come to us from a wide range of backgrounds. We've had people from, you call it binary, I think it's probably more than that. But the point is that it's doing those cases, bringing those cases, which start off in case support, where there's a long time spent assessing, what questions they're going to get answered, what the Commission can do for them. We do some scoping work at that stage because we want to ensure that we don't create false expectations. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on at that stage, and also engagement with the wider family before people go into the information recovery end. And that's why the figures look heavy at this stage in the case support end, but they're moving through in the way that we would expect. But the point is that we have the cases now. It's up to us to actually demonstrate what we can do with them, and as so often happens in the legacy area, it's what you do rather than what you say, and that is the absolutely critical thing. I keep saying, when I introduced the legacy inquest unit, there are 2 points of note. One, there was a completely inadequate legislative base, the Coroners Act 1959, an act that was passed before there was even the UK had signed up to personal petition to the European Court of Human Rights. We didn't need to change the act in order to work out what we could do to deliver for people in legacy inquests. Here again, we have an act. It's not a very good act. It's got huge difficulties. We've got a rhetoric which is even worse. But the question for us is, well, is there enough material here for us to do the same sort of thing that we did with the legacy inquest unit and actually ensure that we can gain the confidence of people? And I know that when the legacy inquest unit was set up, families were telling me that this was a trick, that it was a way of doing them out of an answer to their problems, and it was only when we did what we did that attitude changed.
Okay, thank you. Just to pick up on that point then, so in your opinion, do the actions in terms of the legal challenges of the UK government in recent inquests to prevent coroners publishing a gist of P11 material provide you with an indication of the extent to which they will try to suppress any information?
I think what tells me about what information will and will not be available is the decision of the Court of Appeal, which was given, I think, on the 30th of April, which actually deals with the principles which are applicable. And one of the important things to recognise about us is that we can take legal proceedings against the government and against those who might seek to prevent disclosure. There is an interesting issue here in that if you have sensitive material which leads to somebody actually being subject to a control order or something like that, the European case law is quite clear that you have to give them a gist which is meaningful so that they can answer the case. If, on the other hand, it's something which is to do with your entitlement to participate in a civil action, the law at the moment says that broadly there the presence of a special advocate, which we can use, gives the sort of independence that enables you to ensure that the hearing is fair. The question is whether or not cases of this kind can be shifted into the first category, or at least away from the second category.
I just have a wee follow-up. I'm going to be I'm conscious I think everybody wants to come in. So in the report it says the Chief Commissioner is responsible for producing reports at the conclusion of investigations and has a general power to disclose information as sees fit. Is there any way that ministers can prevent onward disclosure of sensitive information in your report, or is that what you're talking about there in terms of you could legally?
That's what I'm talking about. In any public inquiry, you have exactly this. I often think public inquiries are misnamed. The only reason people call public inquiries is because there's a lot of information that they don't want to disclose in public. I mean, that's the truth of it. What will happen in the reports is that the same principles will be applied. In other words, what can we show in the same way as if we had a public inquiry in place in those cases where there's a lot of sensitive information. Of course, we have been successful in the inquest cases in ensuring that through gisting and other things that we have actually managed to disclose quite considerable volumes of information which have been enormously helpful to people in getting the unvarnished truth about things that happened to their loved ones. And it was interesting, for instance, in the Bloody Sunday inquiry, where I appeared for two of those who were injured, that there wasn't all that much sensitive material, but the inquiry did actually have, with the consent of all the parties, a hearing with the security service in the course of that inquiry.
Thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today to chat to us. Louise, I know you touched on this, but obviously the Executive Office is working on a new strategy for victims and survivors. I do think that was a missed opportunity to not engage with the ICRIR, given that you were in development at that point. And in the draft strategy, there's no mention of it, and given the role it now plays for victims and survivors, do you think that also was a missed opportunity? And have you engaged with TU in regards to the strategy and its development?
Well, but I might take counsel from other colleagues, but I certainly think we can work by working together, and we've already set that out. We would wish to make sure that alignment is there. Sorry, Leslie.
We have reached out to the First and Deputy First Minister. We haven't had a meeting yet, but they're very busy, and this is not finger pointing in any way at all. It's just it'll happen in due course, I'm sure. Sorry, Leslie.
But we can chase that up as well.
Good.
Go ahead.
Just to say, when I came into post in March, it was evident that we desperately needed to begin that engagement in a really clear and intentional way. So part of my task is to do that, and I'm working closely with the VSS on how to best work together and collaborate with the sector around the skills that they already have and have developed over many years. It would be really helpful to engage around the strategy as well. I'd be very keen to do that and open to any meeting or encouragement that can be found on that.
Okay, thank you. Carol, please.
Thank you. Good to see you, Louise, as Peter and Sir Declan and Leslie. So there is a lot of concern and criticism around the ICRIR, given the fact that, set out in the Stormont House Agreement, there's two vehicles, with HIU and the rest were two separate bodies. So those functions are now brought under one body, and that's caused a lot of concern. And secondly, I think even just from the commentary of working with families who have been denied inquests, and Sir Declan, you will be more than aware of most of them. But the fact is, there isn't a consensus here on the independence, and there isn't a consensus on the effectiveness. For example, the public interest immunity certificates that have been issued in courts that have prevented inquests, have prevented people getting access to truth. How will they be overcome?
Maybe I could just talk a little about the process first. So when you start off with an inquest, every now and then you will find that something turns up which is unexpected. It might be the fact that somebody who was an agent of police or security service, army, whoever, was involved in some way, and then you've got to work out how you manage this. Now, I wrote a judgment back in 2018, which is referred to in the Court of Appeal decision in a case called Flynn, where I suggested that the hard work should be done in trying to create a gist which ensures that the family get a real understanding of the issues insofar as they affect what they're doing, and that will enable the families to have as much open information as possible, and also ensure that they will understand exactly why the decision was made and the reasons for it. The coroners' courts have been using that approach regularly, and I think you'll find from the cases that have gone through the coroners' courts that there's a very high degree of satisfaction about the outcomes. I was talking to one Belfast solicitor about this, and he said that he'd had 15 cases where people who were asserted by the state in some way to be gunmen or terrorists or involved in some way in nefarious activity, who'd been vindicated by the outcome in the coroners' courts. And I think that is an extraordinarily important issue, that those who have been identified by the state as being in some way or other wrongdoers and sought to excuse what happened to them, whether it was death or serious injury, that there needs to be a recognition that needs to be addressed and the truth be told in relation to it. And that's what Bloody Sunday did, it's what Ballymurphy did, but there are also a number of other cases where all of that has happened. There is every now and then something which, and it doesn't happen very regularly, but it does happen from time to time, something that is brought forward which makes it impossible to get the gist. And I think there are about 5 cases where the security service or whoever it was has given so much of sensitive information. It's only because the sensitive information has been disclosed that the coroner said, "Look, I can't manage this." And in those cases, when they come to be dealt with as public inquiries, there will be, in those cases, almost certainly a special advocate involved. And the first duty of the special advocate is to work out, is there any way in which we can show this information outside these closed proceedings to the families? And that is the most important task, in my view, of the special advocate, to ensure that the families are given that option. So we come, if you like, with the background of the Court of Appeal decision, which is as helpful as it could have been to the families, and that's the basis upon which our work will be carried out.
So this is probably more of a political question, which I'm not expecting you to answer.
I don't do politics, I'm glad to say.
I know,
I've enough problems trying to do law.
But well, listen, you've done it very well, so fair play. But all I'm saying is that, the Stormont House Agreement was there, it was signed up by, even including the British government.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This is not the same.
I agree with that. But the thing that everybody signed up to wasn't the same. We have to be honest about it. Some people signed up to it because they saw justice. Some people signed up to it because they saw vindication of wrongdoing by the state. But they weren't signing up to the same thing. Some of your colleagues, political colleagues, I'm not saying from your party, but politicians in Northern Ireland have told me that the Stormont House Agreement, despite the fact everybody signed up to it, actually, in terms of having support from all of the parties here, was a non-runner. And I am naive enough, back in 2020-21, I went to an all-party meeting of the Parliamentary Human Rights Group, and we talked about the statement which had been issued by Brandon Williams, which was very divisive, and everybody was opposed to what the government was going to do. And at that meeting, I proposed that the 5 parties should go away, and if they were able to agree a version of the Stormont House Agreement between them, that would be proved so politically strong that in fact the bill would have been defeated, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, so that's for the record. But the issue is that when it comes to getting access, you know, if coroners' courts can't get access to information because of public information and immunity certificates, how are you? I just think there's a huge confidence issue from NGOs to families to even the Irish government and others around the capability and even the independence of yourselves in order to execute what you obviously desire that you want to do, and that's an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think I need to be clear. The coroner's court, we, because of our powers, we will get it. The getting is something that I think we have enormous control over. The disclosure, I think I can see that there will from time to time be a battle about, and I mean that's the way it is. On independence, I mean this was talked up and down the first instance hearing before Mr. Justice Colton, and he found that we were independent. Now, independence is the sort of elastic type thing. You can have too much of it nearly. We would like to have as much as possible, so we're delighted that the Secretary of State wants to enhance our independence. And the last thing I want to say, if I can, is that I understand the resentment about the Act. I mean, resentment is not too strong enough in terms of it. And the big challenge, the really big challenge facing us, is to ask people to put the Act to one side and look at the Commission, because we have put the Act to one side and we put the rhetoric that the government had when introducing the Act to one side, and we have produced something which bears no relationship whatsoever to what the government intended. I mean, we have put a process in place which is effectively the same as an inquest and inquiry approach when the government's stated objective was to close inquests down.
And Chair, just maybe just to add to Carol's concerns. So my powers allow me to, under Section 5, to ask for information from any of the state agencies that has to come to me unredacted, unaltered, unmodified, and the decision about relevance and what's appropriate is my decision, not the agencies decide what they will give me or what they will show me. So my powers are more than the coroner's powers in that I can demand information in the way that I see as reasonable to answer the questions I have from whatever families it is.
Peter, just last question, Chair. So, for example, if you don't get the information and you get documents that are so heavily redacted, you might be able to see the day's date. Are you going to take the British government to court to get it?
They can't give me redacted documents.
Okay,
the legislation doesn't allow them to.
So say, for example, then PIICs are handed, there's a bar in order. Are you going to go to get those bars unlifted?
That may well be what we may have to do, and Sir Declan has said that it may be that we may have to take the government to court at times in this. That'll be a judgment for ourselves as to whether the information we think, on balance, should be revealed. And if people disagree with the government, then the people who will make the ultimate decision are the court. The court will decide whether we can disclose or not disclose, not the Secretary of State or the government in it.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to you all for your presentation. Maybe somewhat related to the questions that Carol was asking, I'm sure that you are aware of the comments that were made by Justice Kenny, who was the coroner in the Sean Brown case, and the call that he made for a public inquiry for the family of Sean Brown into his murder, a call that was then followed up by endorsements from Baroness Nuala O'Loan and from the Chief Constable and from the former Taoiseach, Leah Varadkar. And obviously the family of Sean Brown have rejected your process and are concerned about the validity of it and whether or not it will bring them the truth that they need and deserve. I suppose I would ask you, are all of those people wrong? Was the coroner wrong? Is obviously we've had similar concerns from the UN and from the Court of Europe. Are the family of Sean Brown and other families like them wrong? Well,
I think you're wrong about Europe. The head of the Council of Europe's Department for the Enforcement of Judgments has issued a statement after our last meeting saying that he was impressed by the strenuous efforts that we had made to ensure that we could provide Article 2 and 3 compliant cases.
What concerns in trust in the process?
Pardon? No. You said in Europe. What I'm saying is that in the Council of Europe, anyway, we've had a clear endorsement. We've also spoken to the UN, both at Assistant Secretary General level in New York, and also in Geneva at Deputy Commissioner level, and had a very positive meeting with Christian Salazar. And the only reason we didn't get to meet Volker, the Chief Commissioner, is that he was in South America doing other things. So in terms of the case that you mentioned, this is sub judice in the sense that it is before the courts and is likely to be heard sometime around the middle of October. But the courts have found that we can provide Article 2 and 3 compliant investigations. And what nobody has explained to me is what is it about what we can do that fails the Article 2 and 3 test? Because that's what inquests and inquiries are all about the Article 2 and 3 test. What is it that fails it? Now, I'm not suggesting you answer the question, because you ask the questions and I answer.
So I listed a number of people there that had concerns about your process and who had endorsed a call for a public inquiry into the case of Sean Brown. I mean, a lot of the worries are around the fear that your report would be subject to veto by the British Secretary of State, and obviously already outlined by both the Chair and Carol in terms of the PAAs and the amount of redaction that led the coroner to say that he couldn't complete the inquest into the murder of Sean Brown. And what I'm asking there, are all of those people wrong? Like,
and you've obviously looked at what a public inquiry would involve, and you understand that the involvement of the Secretary of State would be the same. Presumably you understand that. So, in a public inquiry, the Secretary of State can give a ministerial direction as to what is to be disclosed and what isn't. That's the point about a public inquiry. It doesn't do what it says in the tin. And sometimes what happens is that people go and create expectations with families about things that are going to happen that can't happen. And it's not fair to the families for that to happen.
Thank you. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of you. In previous lives, I have a huge amount of respect for each of you, and I think the challenges you're experiencing are because of politics, not necessarily in terms of what you're trying to do. I suppose it is about the confidence in the ongoing politics in people coming to you. I've had constituents myself want to get answers, and I'm directing them to you as the only body available to them. However, I'm almost caveating that with a new government that doesn't necessarily support the Legacy Act and where we go from there. And it does still feel that this is very messy in terms of getting answers and outcomes for people. And I do agree with your comments in relation to previous bodies and what we could have done there. So I suppose how can we give confidence to people to come to you? Because I think 85, I don't know what proportion of that of investigations you would want to be looking at, but I'm sure it's quite small. And even you 10 and we're only at 8. Now please tell me the right figures in relation to that. Yeah, go ahead. I
mean, the figures were as at the 31st of August.
Okay.
We are a growing organisation. The thing we do differently from almost every other investigative organisation of this sort is that we think it is important to spend, as Leslie says, a long time in the early stages creating expectations about what we can do and what we can't. And that means that you've got to look at, do the scoping, get a sense of what's out there, what material might be available, get a sense from the family of what it is they want to achieve, and to make sure that those two things can be aligned insofar as they can be. And if there is a family that wants more than we're able to achieve, that at least when they go into the investigative process, they'll understand that we don't think that we'll be able to get what they want, but we might be able to get other things. So that's why the case support figure is what it is, because all of that takes time and several meetings and before, and the investigator will actually be in some of those meetings as well, doing the scoping exercise. And what happens is then it moves out of the case support stage. Case support worker will stay with the family right through the process, but it will then become essentially an investigation and eventually come through to me. Obviously, things have moved on since the 31st of August. We're now over 100 cases of people who have come to into the commission. I mean, we're likely to continue to grow. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's what you would expect.
Maybe just to give you a practical example of where this is, because I think there's been some either misinformation, deliberately or otherwise, about our case numbers. So as Sir Declan says, they sit with Leslie and talk. So I've met families, and even in one family, they want different things. Some of the family, I don't want to know the gory detail of it. You know, sitting in a room with 3 sisters, I don't want to know the gory. I do want to know this. So we have to take time with each of those, because ultimately Sir Declan will be publishing a public report in that. So we think it's really important that we spend time. And I've had somebody come in who has 40 questions. Some of those questions are not capable of being answered in it, but when you sit with them, and Leslie's team sits with them, walks through those questions, they're still entitled to ask me the questions at the end of it. They'll still decide that's their 40 questions. But what we're trying to do is help their expectations in it. That then allows me to make a decision as to which type of investigation. So will it be a criminal justice investigation? Is there evidence to create a prosecution in it? If that's not the case, could it be a culpability investigation, where Sir Declan, his report, might name suspects, subject to, right to life and so on? Or is it a focused investigation? So some families have come and they want the simplest of answers. Who was last to speak to my love? What did they say? Did they get the last rites? Those things have been sitting in people's minds, and I think that we need to create an understanding to the very people you're talking about out there, that this is a very different process. Before this, there was one process, a criminal justice route. There are other options in it for people who want answers to questions, who have never got answers before in it.
Mm-hmm. Just one quick follow-up.
Yeah,
I suppose it's the conversation around reconciliation that's central to who you are. It's central to, I suppose, what you're trying to do. Reconciliation means different things to different people. So how are you, as a commission, an independent commission, defining and conceptualising reconciliation, I suppose in a transitional justice kind of context? So that, yeah.
But we're not going to try and define it, because, as you say, it means different things to different people. What we are going to recognise are some elements of reconciliation which are directly related to our work. I mean, in reconciliation, one-to-one, as it were, arise because somebody does something that perhaps they shouldn't have done, which harms somebody. That person acknowledges what they've done. The two people then decide how to conduct a relationship thereafter. The bit that we're doing in a communal basis is we're there, as Louise said, to tell the unvarnished truth. So people have got to have the opportunity to have acceptance of the effect that the Troubles have had in all sorts of ways. You know, the kids who were left without a dad or a mum, the single mums who were left to bring up kids, no matter what the circumstances of the death, the effect that all of that has had, the sexual violence which was prevalent but hidden within the community as well. All of those things were all part and parcel of the Troubles. We can do a bit of that, in that we can tell the unvarnished truth about some of what happened. It may be hard listening for some people, but if we're going to promote reconciliation, and I think promotion of reconciliation is a process rather than an event, and achieving reconciliation is a further process. One of the things that has struck me about it is that maybe the biggest message of all is to explain to younger people and those who weren't around at the time of the Troubles how awful, the awfulness of settling your differences through violence.
I'd just add that, I mean, that is an evolving piece of work for us. One of the things we do in case support is ask, what does reconciliation mean to you? Have a dialogue about that, and then we feed that back into the Commission and into its processes, so that does inform our work.
Does it help set expectations of what people can hope to achieve, for want of a better word, from this process, if they get a sense of what reconciliation is? And I would expect there are international examples of what reconciliation is. I totally appreciate what you're saying, but I think one of the challenges in Northern Ireland is, people just want truth and justice, but what does that mean? And even those terms themselves means different things to different people. To me, it's access to a process, and a fair and equitable access to a process, which, to be honest, I think has been, it's been difficult in recent weeks because of what's happened politically. So I'm
going to move on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Brian, please, then Timothy.
Okay. Well, look, thank you for your attendance today and the information so far. And the work you're involved in is incredibly sensitive, but incredibly important. And as Peter said, what families and survivors will be wanting will vary greatly. And those coming forward, I know many people who suffered or were bereaved during the Troubles, and some are higher profile, but the vast majority, in my experience, bear their hurt just privately, and it will last their lifetime, and they don't want brought into the public domain. But it's important that there is a body that they can go to, and I welcome that you have had people coming forward. So that's good to hear, that people are wanting to avail of the services. Just for a point out a typo, the information we're given, it says dates 1996 to 1998. I presume that should be 69.
1966.
66 it should be. Yes. Right. Okay. Thank you.
And Brian, it's not just Northern Ireland, obviously across the UK.
Right,
Troubles-related events anywhere.
Right, because it was replicated in our own notes, so anyway, I'm sure you'll get that corrected, that typo. I think the dropping of conditional immunity was important, and I understand there was a desire to encourage people to come forward to disclose information, but it was always going to be a denial of justice that many people thought was too much to have that removed. And especially in a context where, while some groups have made sort of general statements of regret that hurt was caused, quite frankly, they're unrepentant. And when people use terms about saying there was no alternative to violence and destruction, of course there was an alternative, and we're sitting in it, and we are it as MLAs. The alternative is democratic and peaceful process, and that's what people should be involved in if they want to shape society. So, as I say, I think the immunity was always going to be a barrier to people feeling this was a process they could engage with. I do think your biggest challenge will be the balance, and I know you're very much directed by those that come forward, but of course state agencies have records and are publicly accountable. Terrorist groups do not, and make a point of even Martin McGuinness, you mentioned the Bloody Sunday inquiry, made a point of saying that he wasn't going to disclose his role in IRA terrorism at that time. So a narrow spotlight's put on one aspect, and other things, the whole context is ignored. So people will be dubious about what will emerge from all this. Will it be reflective of what happened during the Troubles and where the majority of killings took place? So I know that's a challenge for you, but it's relevant to your central purpose, which I understand is a society which is more reconciled. So it's important that people feel that there is a balance there to what emerges, that it's not just a small number of cases getting a high profile. I welcome, Sir Declan, you mentioned about sexual violence, which occurred during the Troubles, and it's relevant even to our other work, institutional abuse. And I've no doubt that and even to this day, sexual violence and criminality under the cover of somehow being related to political struggle and people abusing those positions of power that they created for themselves. So my only question then, you mentioned about the reports will be published. So obviously you'll have to be sensitive to families. So what is your guidance? If you do a report, is it all published, or then will you, if families ask for certain things, to be held back?
We will publish the report but the way in which we will publish will reflect the engagement with the family. So, for instance, some families will want that vindication to be public, and we could have a press conference, we could have a streaming event, and have a major presentation. Other families will not even want people to know that they were requesters for reasons connected with where they live and their friends and things like that. And although we can publish reports in a way which seeks to maintain that confidentiality, I mean, there's always a risk that there may be some disclosure, but we can, we can, in some circumstances, would have to, where there was a threat to life, to anonymise even the name of the deceased, or the date of the incident, or the precise location of the incident, but maybe to describe some of the circumstances around it, which would not have the effect on a jigsaw basis of identifying somebody. So that stretch, or you can have a courtroom type setting where a ruling is read out. I mean, we can do basically whatever the family in question wants to do, and that will be a matter of negotiation.
Okay, thank you.
Just on your point about information, as the person responsible for collecting that information, I would like to think that if we're all serious and genuine about putting victims and survivors first, and if people come in and ask for questions, then whoever has the answer, wherever that comes from, whether state agents or elsewhere, I would like to think if we're going to ever reconcile the society, people should come forward. The truth is rarely complicated. Evading the truth is complicated. So, I would expect everybody to play their part in this.
Thank you. Timothy, please.
Thank you very much. And just before I do proceed, Chair, I realise we've only a few minutes left. You've been very patient with all the rest of the committee, and I trust that if I haven't got all my questions put to your evidence session, that you'll either give me additional time or you'll ask them to come back again before you cut in like you did on me last week.
Excuse me, please. I'm in the chair. I'll decide how long people get to ask questions, and if I think you're being gratuitously offensive to sections of society, I will cut in, and I reserve that right.
That's okay, as long as you're not trying to censor me, Chair.
Thank you.
I want to just start off with the Secretary of State's announcement that there will be a public inquiry into the Pat Finucane case. Can I just ask, were you consulted prior to that announcement being made?
No. It's nothing to do with us. It's a matter for the Secretary of State alone.
When the announcement was made, there was a quote issued by yourself, Sir Declan, that you welcome the certainty this brings to the Finucane family. It is long overdue.
Yep. The commitment to a public inquiry in relation to Mr Finucane was made about 20 years ago between the two governments. It is an intergovernmental commitment. The delivery of that commitment represents an adherence to the concept of the rule of law on an international basis. If that commitment hadn't been honoured, then I think it might well have been undermining of the approach to the rule of law. But when two governments make a commitment to each other, the expectation is that they will do what they say.
Prior to the evidence session today, I've met with a number of victims groups.
Yeah.
How do you think that statement made them feel, that you welcome them? That there's this thought process, and I can understand why, that certain victims are being treated differently and other ones are being treated as a lesser of a victim, on the basis that a family has got a public inquiry and the rest have been made to go to yourselves.
Well, the position is that I didn't make the commitment on behalf of the government back in 2003, but the commitment was made, and you will need to talk to those who made the commitment to see why they made it. But once they made it, they clearly had created an expectation in relation to a particular case. It's nothing to do with us. We had no engagement with it, but this commitment has been sitting there for 20 years, and it seems to me that the delay that was involved in the government honouring what it, in an international basis, indicated that it was going to do was unfortunate.
You give me your analysis of the ICRIR's ability to consider the Finucane case.
The ICRIR, in my view, could have dealt with the Finucane case in terms of its competence to do it. I've no doubt about that, but I can certainly see that from the point of view of the Irish government, who are challenging the Act and implicitly the Commission, that for the Secretary of State to refer the matter to us might have been a problem.
And just on that, the Secretary of State...
Timothy, this will now be your 6th question, so if you'd like to move on to a different line of questioning, otherwise I'm going to end the session.
This is the last one on that line of questioning. The Secretary of State said that the Finucane case was exceptional. Have you seen anything to suggest that it was exceptional and couldn't have been considered by yourselves?
Apart from the fact that there was an intergovernmental agreement, I'm not aware of any other significant feature of the Finucane case that springs to mind.
I picked up from your evidence you had mentioned about the Irish government. In light of the Irish government's failure to offer anything in legacy, have you confidence that the Irish government will buy into this process?
Whether the Irish government engages looks to me as though it's probably going to be a matter that primarily will be dealt with between the two governments. Certainly the impression that I've had from the statements issued by the Secretary of State and those on behalf of the Irish government is that they both intend to seek to address this. How they address it, I'm not in a position to say at this stage, and I would hope that whatever happens ensures that victims have access to as much information as possible in order to ensure that they get the unvarnished truth in relation to things that happened.
Can you give a commitment?
Quick one, thank you.
Can you give a commitment to families living in Fermanagh along the border that they will get a full and an outcome of all the information that they desire based on the Irish government? You know, for years terrorists used the border. You know, the Republic was known as a safe haven where terrorists could just skip across the border and not have to come back to Northern Ireland.
I think the Commission has an interest in seeking, where it can, to promote the exchange of information from Ireland to the UK in relation to the cases that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious...
Chair,
I'm moving on. We have a really important panel coming up at 3 o'clock. So
could I ask that there's a request that they come back to this committee?
Well, we will decide that as a committee in terms of our forward work programme, but thank you. Leslie, I'm conscious that you haven't had an opportunity to say much today. Is there anything you would like to say, or yourself, Peter?
It would be really good to hear from Leslie, who's my Assistant Commissioner, on the trauma-informed approach, which is very different than what we experienced before.
Yes, well, thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, Chair, as well, because I could talk all day, and I'll try not to. So the trauma and resiliency informed approach is totally central for our work, and it was already well founded by the time I came into the Commission with the foundation of the case support approach, where we would have this single point of contact throughout. And I think on that I want to emphasise that this case support stage is part of an investigation. It's not that they are pre an investigation. We consider this all to be part of the investigation section of our work. So what we want to do is to properly support those coming forward. We will have independent support available to them. I was asked about contact with the wider victims and survivors sector. Really important that we plug into that where we can, and we're working at that. And my staff also will be well trained to deploy skills to enable people to resist or minimise the re-traumatisation that is possible within those engagements. And that training for staff within case support is also across the whole Commission. So if you lift the phone to somebody within the Commission, you should be talking to somebody who knows how to treat you properly, talk to you properly, deploy skills and techniques to enable you to come back from the difficult position that people can get themselves into when talking about traumatic experiences. So that should happen, and if that's not happening, we would really welcome knowing that. So there's a lot of training for us to do and development work around that, but it is central and core, and it will be systemic. It can't be an add-on to anything we do. That's, I think, enough.
Lovely. That's a nice note to end on. But again, thank you for coming. Obviously, as you've said in your report, your work is evolving and your structures and stuff. So we will possibly invite you back again in the future. Okay.
Thank you very
so
much.
Thank you for your time. Okay, members, we're going to move on. Let me just get my computer started again here.
I need to stay on since Belfast.
I know.
So I'm giving apologies, Claire. So
No, I know you started now. It's not good.
no.
Okay, members, so just moving on then, we've got a second session today.
Just repeat it.
Okay, members, so we're taking an oral briefing in relation to the recent racist incidents over the summer. Page 37, if you'd like to start making your way forward, page 37 of your pack, you'll find the clerk's brief. Page 39, you'll find a statement from Migrant Help. Page 3 of the table papers, you'll find a briefing paper from the Belfast Islamic Centre. Page 11 of the pack, you'll find the Muslim Mothers Collection. Page 14 table pack, you'll find an oral statement from the Trustees Board of the Northern Ireland Council for Racial Equality. Page 17 table pack, you'll find a submission on the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination from the Northern Ireland Council for Racial Equality. And you'll find some concluding observations and others things. So, thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to welcome you all individually to the meeting. So we've got Takura Donald McConney, is that how you pronounce your second name? Yes, so from the African and Caribbean Support Organisation Northern Ireland. We've got Laurie Gatsy Barnett, again from Axoni. We've got Dr. Naomi Green from the Belfast Islamic Centre. We've got Mohammed Atif from the Belfast Multicultural Association, and we've got Beverly Simpson from the Northwest Migrants Forum. So I am delighted that you are all here today. Thank you for coming to such short notice. As a committee, this was our first opportunity to get you here. We just from the outside, just like to say, we just appreciate so much what you have had to go through in the summer and the support you've given to the people you represent. So if you'd like to make your opening remarks, I'm not sure who's going to lead.
Right, my name is Beverly Simpson, and I'm here representing Northwest Migrant Forum. We are the primary migrant support organization in Derry, established in 2012 and offering support, advocacy, cultural events, and contributing to policy with all matters related to racial equality. We thank the committee for the invitation at this critical crossroad for the safety and a sense of belonging for the many communities who call Northern Ireland home and contribute so much to our society. The events of this summer has truly put into perspective the long way Northern Ireland still has to go in upholding justice and human rights for all, irrespective of ethnicity, nationality, language, immigration status, and all the various intersections contained within these characteristics. People are terrified. We have heard reports of people in our community being afraid to turn on their lights or to open their blinds in their homes. The feeling is palpable across all generations of the people we support. Children are afraid to return to school. Pensioners are afraid to get groceries. Real damage has been inflicted. While the riots on our streets seem to have stopped, individuals and families are still being attacked and intimidated daily. The most recent hate statistics from the PSNI has shown the highest level of hate incidents and crimes since the figures were first published in 2004-2005. These statistics only capture the period until the 30th of June. Thus, we anticipate a higher statistics again in the forthcoming statistics period since the far-right attacks on the 3rd of August. The APG on Ethnic Minority Committee recently heard the PSNI had noticed a 34.5% increase in this type of violence this summer. the majority of which were attacks on properties. We do not need these statistics for us to know this to be true. We have seen victims suffer the same clinical violence time and time again. Businesses destroyed, livelihoods wrecked, and vital sources of culture and community support in the form of ethnic supermarkets and cafes obliterated overnight. A majority of these for the second or third time. Cautions of something needs to be done before someone is killed have been leveled across social commentators, politicians, and concerned community members. Now we must take this moment to mark the life and untimely death of Anu Saka, a Nigerian nurse who died from an asthmatic attack, running for her life from a racist mob in Newry. Montserrat Montreal was also a migrant woman who was brutally murdered in Derry this month, which puts into sharp focus the intersections between violence against women and girls and migrants in this country. Where do we draw a line? What will be done before someone else is killed? The warning signs for this type of action has been flashing red for some time now. We at the Northwest Migrant Forum knew all too well the potency of this sentiment online, where we witnessed the barrage of harassment, abuse, and threat made against our CEO on our historical achievement of becoming the first Black mayor in Northern Ireland. The seeds of this agitation has been gathering momentum in the online space. It was somewhat unsurprising then for us when we saw the brazen racist riots that took place in Belfast on the 3rd of August. We must take seriously the growth of this far-right populist thinking. We cannot disregard it as online nonsense. The hate speech and agitation online are so real, and tangible violent acts will take place on our streets. We welcome the PSNI that has made 8 arrests relating to online activities, but we need more robust action on hate expression and hate speech, whether it's online, on lampposts, or gamut walls of new housing developments, or to the face of the victim. We are disappointed to learn that the hate crime legislation being brought forth in this mandate will not include reference or provision to tackle this widespread issue. We must also raise a significant issue for victims of hate crime and intimidation. When a person is victimized, they suffer twice. We take the example of a family who were victimized in Belfast, where they had jobs, a support network, and a life. They were upheld and moved to Ballykelly. They lost access to all these things and left further marginalized and limited access to transportation facilities and everything and everyone they knew. The racial equality subgroup recently heard from the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, who noted that all the references, only around a third perpetrators have been evicted of a caseload of over 1,000 cases per year. The burden of evidence and the displacement of victims due to hate crime compounds the harm and belittles the little sense of belongings our migrant communities have in this society. At this point, we refer to the recent recommendations of UN CERT on measures in reducing racist hate crime around reporting, improving investigations and sanctions, data collection, action on hate crime, and xenophobic disclosure by public figures and politicians. We call on the executive to bring forth measures which answers to these expert recommendations as a matter of urgency. Lastly, we refer to the seismic recommendation by the UN CERT, which calls on NI executive to adopt robust measures to prevent and combat paramilitary racist violence and intimidation against ethnic minorities and migrants in Northern Ireland, systemically collect information on these acts of intimidation, and ensure that cases of paramilitary racist violence and intimidation are promptly and effectively investigated, prosecuted, and punished with appropriate sanctions, and that victims have access to effective protection and redress. We urge the committee to take seriously the involvement of paramilitaries in these racist attacks and respond in accordance with these recommendations. Comments from the PSNI have suggested only peripheral involvement of sympathizers. Is that what we are told? Whether it is one member or 100 members, prescribed organizations are engaged in repeat harassment, intimidation, attacks against ethnic minority communities in Northern Ireland. Our community members report being advised by the PSNI to consult, to negotiate, or listen to community leaders with a link to paramilitary organizations. This is not acceptable in any democratic, peaceful society. The executive has a duty to protect the human rights of all its citizens. We need robust action on paramilitary violence in order for this to be recognized. We therefore call on the committee to do everything within its power to strengthen and bring forth racial equality legislation, hate crime legislation, take seriously the far-right threat poses to our community and the future of Northern Ireland as a welcoming and functionable society.
Thank you.
Thank you, very good. Well done. Naomi, would you like to say a few words?
Thanks for having me today. I am here on behalf of the Belfast Islamic Centre. Belfast Islamic Centre is the largest and oldest Islamic centre in Northern Ireland. It's not the only one, it's one of many. I'm not here to speak on behalf of all Muslims, but hopefully to give a little bit of an outline about what our community has experienced over the past few weeks in particular. There are nearly 12,000 Muslims in Northern Ireland, and almost 4,000 of those are children under the age of 18. And it's really important to note that the population is not a monolith. We come from a diverse range of backgrounds and speak over 24 languages alongside English. Around a third are from Southeast Asian backgrounds, such as Pakistani, Indian, Bangladesh and Malay backgrounds, 20% respectively from Arab and African Caribbean backgrounds, with the remainder from Turkish, Kurdish, Iranian, Chinese and European backgrounds, including Kosovan, Bosnian and Albanian. So you appreciate it's an incredibly diverse group of people. Multiple generations of Muslims have actually been born in Northern Ireland despite that diversity. But post-ceasefire and in the wake of Brexit, many more have stepped up to fill labour shortages here in Northern Ireland. They are doctors, locums, nurses, educators, researchers, care assistants, taxi drivers, hairdressers, business owners, homemakers, students and people seeking sanctuary. It shouldn't have to be said, but the job title they have, their visa status, or the economic benefit they may bring does not determine their worth. Being human does. Yet too many have faced and are facing hostility and hatred simply because of who they are, the religion they follow, and in many cases the colour of their skin. There was clear Islamophobic intent in the social media posts leading up to the protests and riots. The violence followed anti-Muslim and anti-migrant riots in England, with local social media posts calling on individuals to defend the Christian West and to march on Belfast Islamic Centre. The events of that day are well documented, but the wider impact beyond the news headlines is probably less so. The greatest impact of the riots was, of course, on those directly attacked and threatened, the businesses destroyed, those chased from their homes, and those who've been moved far away from their workplaces and schools. But the ripple effect on the whole community has been far-reaching. Across Northern Ireland, Muslims were in shock and in fear. People changed their routes to work, changed their working patterns, avoided public places, or stayed inside their homes, unsure of their safety beyond their front door, and sometimes even inside their homes. This included children on their school holidays. Summer schemes and youth clubs were cancelled, and many are now contemplating leaving Northern Ireland to ensure that, because they cannot ensure that Northern Ireland is a safe space for their families anymore. This is shameful. Although the initial police response was disappointed, we are grateful that the police have responded swiftly since. But it's not enough to react when hate surfaces. The underlying causes that allow it to fester must be addressed. Racism and Islamophobia intersect, and there's a long-standing failure to address either of these in Northern Ireland. Attacks in places of worship, previously BMCA, BIC has also been attacked, and of course Nard's Islamic Centre. There's been attacks on homes, attacks on individuals, inflammatory signs that have been up for months and not removed, paramilitary intimidation, which has been happening for years and is still ongoing. The majority of Muslims in Northern Ireland, there's more detail in the report, but the majority of Muslims in Northern Ireland have experienced Islamophobia, and the majority of these have not been reported to police or to authorities because there's a belief that nothing will be done. Low prosecution rates have created a climate of impunity. We need real, meaningful engagement to tackle racism and Islamophobia alongside it, through education, community engagement and legislation. And I'm not talking about superficial gestures or tick box exercises, which we have seen so many of over the years, and we are tired. Inclusive cultural festivals and celebrations are fantastic and important, but they alone are not enough. Research shows that mental health outcomes for minority ethnic children and migrant origin children in Northern Ireland are much lower, twice as low as their peers. This tells us something troubling. Too many of our children are made to feel that they do not belong here in Northern Ireland. They're treated as if they are outsiders, literally labelled others, in the only home they have ever known, and we must change that. The school's role goes beyond ensuring the physical safety of every child. The curriculum must reflect the diversity of our society and embrace all communities, showing every child that these others are also part of Northern Ireland. Employers, including health trusts, must do more to tackle racism in the workplace, particularly against IMGs and locums who don't have the same job security as those with full-time jobs. Ethnic monitoring, which was first recommended 20 years ago as part of the racial equality strategy, must be implemented without delay, alongside religious monitoring that goes beyond categories of orange and green. How can we see inequalities when we don't even collect the evidence? Judge Marinen's hate crime recommendations must be urgently implemented to ensure those who spread hate and who radicalise young people to hate are also held accountable. And I'm grateful that Naomi Long has mentioned that this will be introduced in later on, but that this needs to be done urgently. We cannot have delays on this. Finally, I'd like to recognise and thank those who have done so for the positive support from many political leaders who stood firm in condemning all forms of racism, xenophobia and Islamophobia, and the community response has been incredibly heartwarming. However, there are voices within the political and media space who continue to speak of legitimate concerns in a way that subtly excuses attacks and prejudice on minority communities in Northern Ireland. There is nothing legitimate about fueling resentment and scapegoating Muslims or other minorities for complex issues like housing shortages or economic difficulties, and you will not resolve them by scapegoating us. Muslims should not be used as a political football or a fig leaf for political feelings elsewhere. This is our home. Muslims, alongside other minority communities, are an integral part of this place. It's time for the Assembly to take meaningful action that goes beyond statements or reports, because we've had so many, ensuring that inclusivity and equality are not just ideals, but lived realities. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Laurie, would you like to speak?
Well, what I will try and do is, I'm the chair of the African and Caribbean Support Organisation, so I will give you an overview, which is a bullet point format of the types of things my colleagues have already echoed. Takura will probably furnish you with the more, I suppose, details from a personal account and others such like that would be complementary to what I'm saying.
Perfect, thank you.
Axoni was established in 2003, and since then, as we're looking at ourselves today, we cover over 37 nationalities that come through our doors. Now, as a result of what we've seen over summer, one very significant fact is the fact that the definition of immigration needs to be readdressed to the community. how they define immigration, how they define immigrants, the classification of individuals assumed to be immigrant, and what that does when you have an anti-immigrant sentiment. So having said that, when we're looking at that, there's an impact of an anti-immigrant sentiment. It not only affects the politics of our country and the types of things that we want to have done here, it also has socio-economic impact, because there are lots of disadvantaged individuals within our communities who end up being further minoritized due to other identities they might possess. When we're looking at our census 2011, 2021, there's significant growth, and there continues to be significant growth. If we had to take another census right now, there would be significant differences compared to when it was last done. As a result, we need to change our services, the language in which we approach things, the equitable factors as opposed to just the equality of things is what we want to hopefully appeal to you to look at when you're looking at individuals who come from the diverse ethnic communities. It's about the equitable factors, and often equity and equality tend to be surmised as one and the same thing, but they're not. And what we're asking for is not a spotlight on us who have different heritage or come with different attributes to this community, but to be seen as one community who have many different elements as the same singular community, who might have different cultural backgrounds and heritage, but all of us collectively working to economically, politically, socially, whether it's housing, health, etc., working together, unified, but recognized as one singular community. There are all the other things such as social exclusion. When you're hearing from my colleagues the types of scenarios that are implicating individuals who already feel insecure by being here. A lot of people through summer have been re-traumatized due to things. They came here seeking peace, and that very peace that they have known for a while has now been taken away from them. So how do we reassure individuals who are seeking refuge or asylum on these shores that this is a place for refuge for them? That is now under threat and is now under question, and a lot of people who have significant roles to play, whether it's in NHS, in our education, and many other layers within our economic and even our everyday life, are now questioning if they indeed should be here, and if they have to go, where do they go and where do they begin? It's quite a process altogether. We're also trying to figure out the educational gaps, not only from primary, secondary, but even further education, and the opportunities associated with us continue to contribute to the economy. If you're looking at the statistics, we contribute substantially by having the entrepreneurial and other exercises that we bring income into the country. So while it might be assumed that there is a larger people seeking refuge or asylum, there are individuals who hold a different classification under immigration who are contributors to our economy and are essentially taxpayers. So we also want to address, there's been a discrepancy as far as the United Kingdom overall in addressing and acknowledging the UN Decade of People of African Descent. It was begun in 2014. It concludes this year on the 23rd of December, 2024. The whole aim of that was the United Nations declared that there should be a global awareness and recognition to the contributions made by people of African descent. Now, whilst other nations have done something and have contributed, the United Kingdom unfortunately hasn't done anything that has been significant to accept, acknowledge, and also look at the types of scenarios of individuals of African descent that exist, not only in a Northern Ireland context, but across the whole country as a whole. So we're also asking for you to have this consideration, because this would help to dilute some of the thoughts and feelings that are associated when people are looking at immigrants, because there are many elements to our history. I mean, the only person, if you think about as far back as 1845, is Frederick Douglass, but I would hazard to suggest that there has been more individuals of African descent who come from across the world who have contributed to the framework and the history of Northern Ireland. So I could go on essentially with an extensive list, but I will hand over to Takura, who can give you more detailed information, and I thank you for this time.
Thank you, Laurie. Go ahead, Takura.
Thank you, Chair. My Chair has been quite succinct in her brief on our organization, so I won't delve much into that. What I would like to do briefly is give a contextual overview of the anti-immigrant sentiments and the support organizations in Northern Ireland purporting to support these afflicted groups. So for context, I moved to Northern Ireland in 2001. 12,000 jobs were about to be lost at Bombardier, and the Labour government was going to lose. Those jobs were saved. However, today in 2024, organizations like Axoni are supporting refugees and asylum seekers from Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, the Horn of Africa, and many other countries of which our government is involved either directly or indirectly. Okay? This is the context in which I want to talk about anti-immigrant sentiment in this country. The linkage between sectarianism and racism highlighted by Judge Marion when the Racial Equality Strategy of 2015 to 25 was launched. This is still vehemently denied by law enforcement and a significant amount of political figureheads and their parties. Messaging is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, practice on the ground is divergent from that. We know that because we operate within the third sector. Organizations across Northern Ireland who do not have the cultural competency nor trauma-informed approach are recipients to funding to support communities they do not have the know-how, lived experience, nor the desire to service. Institutional racism is ubiquitous in the third sector. Organizations are being funded off the suffering of individuals, families, and communities that suffer beyond the puff pieces and the photo opportunities. We must avoid hubris and begin to scrutinize our protectionist practices. That is the context within which I would like us, hopefully, to explore these issues. Because we and other organizations that I'm sitting with here and beyond, we are struggling to support our people, your people, because we all live in this country. We are struggling and we are not getting the support. Sadly, there are organizations here because they have historical linkages with institutions, funding institutions. They will get the funding to have, as Paula mentioned, to have events, cross-community events and so on, which are all very nice, fair and dandy, but what is the output after those events? I'll give you an example. Open Botanic is an event which has been held for 2 years in a row. My organization attended and had a stall there last year. What was the result of having that stall there? We didn't have any new walk-ins because of that. We didn't create, or no new organizations approached us to create partnerships or collaborations to support our community. However, that one-day event costs almost 40,000. Our organization, when we are applying for money to fund key support workers who have the cultural competence to deal with people from all over these countries I spoke about, who don't have translators, the mental health, well-being practitioners in this country, many of them aren't even interested in assisting these individuals, even before we deal with the cultural and linguistic barriers that they have to deal with to get the kind of services that they require. These are traumatized individuals. And so I'm saying that to say, what benefit is an Open Botanic event, which is a cultural event, which costs 40,000 to host, of which, to be honest with you, I will be quite frank with you because it is time for us to be frank with each other as fellow human beings. It's a wonderful piece to put in the press that yes, all these organizations who are here to support these poor people, unfortunate people, have gathered and had this lovely event. But most people from these communities are either, because of reasons mentioned by my colleagues, stuck in their houses. They're not coming out anyway unless they have to go to work or send their kids to school because they don't feel welcome. They don't. So spending 40,000 on an Open Botanic event is really spending 40,000 on yourselves. It's not for us. It's making yourself feel good for doing something which actually has no outcome for the community that you're being funded to service. And I'm saying this to say this is ubiquitous in the third sector. So many organizations are being funded to support Islamic people, to black people, Asian people, whatever it is, put whatever label it is you want to put on it. These organizations have linkages here in Northern Ireland, so they will get the funding. Organizations like the organizations here sitting in front of you, when we put in applications, we are scrutinized, we are derided, and it's almost like an audit, putting in an application. And then when you do finally get an answer, it's usually what you're doing for the community isn't enough. But if we were to put up an application for 40 grand to have a one-day event, I can just about guess what the answer is going to be to that as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for my colleagues here. Antigera, thank you very much. That was very emotional. I am Mohammed Latif. I represent Belfast Political Association. Some of you guys have met me before, and some of you know me a little bit that I don't really have filters most of the time when I talk. Because what I believe is when you don't really put your point across as a problem, when the problem is not acknowledged, there is no solution. So let's face there is a problem. I'll give you some of the background of myself personally. I moved to Northern Ireland 16 years ago. I have a family here. I got married to a Pakistani woman, beautiful, with the 4 daughters. They have not seen any other country. Northern Ireland is their home. My question to you, usually I leave my speeches with the question, but here I think I have to ask you the question first. When do I stop being an immigrant? Is there a timeline? It's been 16 years. My kids have not seen any other country as their home country. When they stop being immigrant? We have seen 3rd generation, 4th generation of the immigrants in this country. They're still being called immigrant. Do you not think it's racist on itself? When will I be classed local? I don't know. I've asked the question before, I'm asking it again. I will leave it with you, with your good hands. Maybe there is something Northern Assembly can do to class us as citizens of this country, to class us as a local. Please do not call us immigrants anymore. Honestly, this hurts. When you look into yourself and you see that what you have done, I tell you what I've done in the last 1 year. 200 jobs I've created. I've invested millions in the last 1 year in this country. I've created over 1,000 jobs over the time I'm here. I've opened and I've successfully ran multiple businesses. And I'm proud of that. And you know how many locals I employ? 99%. But I am not local. There you go. Going to a little bit more details. It's only one of me sitting here, but there are hundreds of them, hundreds of me in Northern Ireland. There are many people I know, they're from immigrant backgrounds, and they employ thousands of local people. So please consider them part of the community. Don't leave them out. From there, I see us being a contributor into the economy, not a burden. I've never claimed a single benefit, not even a child benefit, because I feel like it's for somebody who is in a need. It's not for me. I want to contribute into the economy, which I have been doing. And I don't want to class people. Yes, there is a less privileged people. There is a more, a bit more with more privileges, but everybody is equal. This is what my religion teaches me. See, with the Muslims, when we stand for pray, everybody prays the same. When we sit to eat, everybody eats the same. There's no classes. And when I see myself in Northern Ireland, I'm still maybe a 3rd class, because apparently the upper 2 classes have already been taken. I don't even know if I'm in a 3rd class or a 4th or 5th, but I'm not there. Anywhere I go, I see and I feel racism. This dark skin, different features, it comes with a bit of immune of racism. We don't really make noise when you guys probably would consider that racist. We don't make noise on that. We are immune to that because we feel like, oh, that's fine. And that is dangerous. There's a plenty of times when my sister's here, my brother here, myself, they will tell you their experiences, the things they've been called, the things they've witnessed, the things they were in, in that incident. They might have not reported. They might have thought, oh, that's okay. I'm not going to do anything about it. But that acceptance is already there. But how long can we hold it? I don't want to repeat anything what my colleagues have said because I had a long list of them as well. But how long can we hold it? The one thing you guys have witnessed in these events, that immigrants did not react. Did you see any event where immigrants reacted? Are we not human beings? We've been called whatever names. And I'm very sorry to say that politicians at the start disappointed me, and all of us. When we were called and we were offered a private visit. Why would you want to visit us privately when we really want you to come out publicly? That where you stand. Yes, at the end, we had majority of the politicians come around, and I appreciate the guys who have worked hard on the NI Assembly when the sessions were called and then the motion was passed. And I really appreciate that work. But that work was after the big damage. And then what happened, let me just touch base with the PSNI there as well. What I don't like about the PSNI approach is the evidence gathering. They stand, they watch, they let the incident happen, they gather the evidence, and then they go after them. Why would you want to do that? Have a feeling. I'm a businessman, and if somebody's burning my business place, and I have 5 Range Rovers, police Range Rovers, there, and I have 30 or 40 police officers watching it, honestly, what country are we living in? You're not preventing it. What approach do we have? I have a very clear message for PSNI as well. And probably they hate me as much as some of the other people do because I don't really have filters. Enough is enough. I'm a contributor in this country. I want the respect. I'm demanding that respect now, honestly. Because if we don't, the things will go even worse. Back to some of my notes. I'm really very sorry. I get emotional. In those events, my family didn't leave the house for 3 weeks. I didn't really go and put my face out in my business for weeks and weeks because I was scared. Because I didn't want my business to have those damages, what we have seen on the Botanic Avenue on the Sandy Rose. I had to do all the groceries because my wife was still not comfortable going to Tesco's even. For weeks. All the summer clubs was cancelled. I had booked my family holidays, and coincidentally they were in the middle of this whole things. It was very easy decision for me to leave Northern Ireland for 3, 4, 5 weeks. I'm fortunate enough to maybe I could probably leave for 2 months. And I thought, no, I'm not running away from here. Only reason, if I did, who would represent some of the communities I'm honored to represent. I speak on their behalf. And I hope I'm doing the job right and up to their expectations. So I chose to cancel my holidays and I chose to stay in Northern Ireland. Now, when we are going back to some of the incidents, the attacks at the start, they were very Islamophobic. We knew where that mob was going from the city hall on the 3rd of August, Saturday. And the police actually allowed that mob to move towards the Botanic Avenue to Broadbury Place and all those sites. All they did was they had an announcement in that Range Rovers telling the mob, or this mob or this group of whatever they call it, is moving towards the other sides and it's illegal and they should stop and all of that. And I'm thinking, you know that this is illegal and you are letting it happen. And basically you're protecting them, you're guiding them where to go. And they had the resources out of Belfast Islamic Centre. Thanks to PSNI, they were able to save the Islamic Centre. But then, where's the intelligence? You know that if they weren't able to go on one side, there's 3-4 other Islamic centres within the half-mile radius. These people can go on the other side. And I felt that police has actually diverted the whole thing to the other side. So there's a lot of failures on police behalf. Yes, after the big damage, then there was a repair work from the police, which they have done very good. But it doesn't really help to have everything to be responsible for a majority of the events and then trying to brush it off with some sort of security or some sort of response after the big events. So, I'm sorry guys, I don't want to repeat many things. So two-tier policing, yes, that's what we see. We have seen exactly what happens when the law is enforced in Derry, Londonderry, when Northwest Migration Forum had the Black Lives Matters protest, and every person in the protest was given the fines. But in Belfast City Centre, it didn't happen. When police knew that that was wrong, and it didn't happen. Only because that time it was the immigrants or the majority of the black and brown people were protesting. They were fined. When a white person do whatever they like, it's all right. They were warned on the speaker, on the loudspeaker, not even a proper caution or proper warning. No, that doesn't happen with white people. The people coming here, I mean, the other term I am against to use, I don't call them far rights, they are far from right. Let's put it right. They are not right, far rights. They've been listened to, they've been given all the VIP treatment. Some of the politicians try to make this as a housing crisis or a jobs. The immigrants are taking the jobs or they're taking the benefits. It's a Google word. Honestly, Google it. You will get your facts right. What immigrants are contributing to this country, and if these housing crises are because of the immigrants. It's the politicians. Wake up. You are responsible for housing crises, not the immigrants. So I would ask everyone here to enough of the talks, please act. Enough is enough, please act, and please consider us as a part of the community. Northern Ireland is a one community, and please promote that. People listen to politicians here. And please be clear where you stand and you have influence in your communities. We have such divided community here in Northern Ireland. Sometimes, you know, I don't want to be more controversial here. I've said it one time before. I just don't understand, why do we celebrate divide in this society? Why do we do that? We are such a small society compared to many other countries in the world. Why can't we just live happily? Why can't we just live together? We don't have to love each other. You just have to accept each other as they are, and let's live peacefully. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Really powerful testimonies there. I really appreciate that, and I think that's what we were looking for today. We wanted the reality and the your requests. So really appreciate that. I should have said at the start that we have the departmental officials are coming in 2 weeks' time, so that what you have told us today then we can put to them, and they will be responding to the recall motion, which was around what's happening with the racial equality strategy, that the next one, what's happening with refugee integration, and what's happening with the race relations order, the revised one. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time, and so your contributions today are so timely, and we've set it up in that regard. I have a couple of quite quick questions for yourselves, if you don't mind. And Laurie, I think it was you raised the issue around equitable factors as opposed to equality factors, and I suppose it would be useful to see what do you mean by that, and how would that manifest itself in society in terms of public services. Thank you.
I know everyone knows Section 75, so I don't have to give you the 9 protected characteristics. I would hazard to say that when you're looking at the 9 protected characteristics, when we're talking about equity, it's not just looking at the protected characteristic, but it's looking at the attributes of the characteristic and what sort of adjustments need to be made so that the individuals who are protected can be better included in whatever's going on. So Section 75 to us stands as an incomplete document if you do not have the other policies in place to make sure that there's a responsibility of individuals not just protecting their characteristics, but their day-to-day inclusion and whatever other other adjustments need to be made. So for example, if you walk into A&E and English is not your first language, you clearly have an emergency. It's not just enough to recognize that you're from a diverse ethnic community group. It's being able to be culturally competent to recognize that perhaps we need to make adjustments for, if you're a Muslim woman, for example, I shouldn't be getting a man to be the one who addresses you. I should understand that, maybe take you to a private space and maybe have a woman be the one who speaks to you. And it's only about making you feel safe and secure when you're being addressed. So that's what I mean when I'm saying equitable. It's being culturally competent enough to make the relevant adjustments to all those 9 protected characteristics. I hope that gives you enough clarity.
Go ahead, yes, please.
Part of the problem is, well, we do not have ethnic monitoring in Northern Ireland. Most of our monitoring is, are you part of the Protestant Catholic community? And what that means is, so we know from data across the UK that there's higher maternal death in minority ethnic communities, but particularly for a Black Muslim woman, you're most likely to die if you're a Black Muslim woman in the UK. We don't have that data in Northern Ireland. So we cannot monitor whether we are, our basic stuff like that. Are there more mothers dying in childbirth? Are there more babies dying in childbirth from certain communities? And if so, why? And we don't even know that because we don't collect the data. So that really ties in. This is an urgent thing that could be implemented. Everything's ready in place, and it should be implemented urgently to collect full religious data and ethnic monitoring so that we can know if this is actually happening, and if there's something wrong, we need to fix it. Because if you don't have the evidence, you're never going to know.
And just to support what Naomi is saying, the assumption that a person of colour's pain threshold is higher. So if I present and I'm saying I'm in pain, I'm given less the dosage of cocodamol that I need because I am in pain. The last time I checked, human biology is the same. And the only difference is the BMX index. So it's only between your height and weight that determines the dosage. But the simple fact that you assume I don't feel pain, I do not know where that notion comes from. And a lot of women have undiagnosed things through maternity. Yes, you have somebody who's looking after you in maternity, but there isn't somebody who can identify if you have sickle cell anemia. There isn't anyone who can identify if there's a likelihood of other blood disorders or other such things that could be controlled. Or you're being given diabetic medication when all you need to do is change your diet. So it's very simple, practical things that are being omitted when it's being taken into consideration the diversity that exists in our community. And I suppose index for everything is stereotypically put against a white male's biological makeup versus what happens when you come from a different heritage background, what happens when your biological makeup is slightly different. So you're getting medication that's irrelevant, essentially not fit for purpose for the person who's consuming it. So these are the types of things that we then would like to have the monitoring that will then inform clinicians when they're dealing with individuals that they're doing the appropriate level of care and making sure that what is being administered is accurate. We're now finding that there are a lot more cancer patients who are presenting from diverse ethnic communities with stage 4 and worse, who are not being diagnosed earlier. So these are the sorts of things that if we're one community, why should it be that if a white woman goes and gives birth, she has exceptional care and she doesn't have to be a royal to get that kind of care? But when it's a woman of colour and she's exhibiting that she's in pain and she needs to have an emergency C-section, it takes you to see a breech baby to recognise that you should have done a C-section prior. So I think those are the types of things that we're experiencing. And even when you're going through the process of labour, young mothers are presenting a lot more. And even if they get a translator in, there's still the duty of care to the patient. The privacy that is required is completely disregarded. So those are some of the concerns.
Can I give a real example? About 2 weeks ago, I went to ACE. I was at Galvin Emergency, and I was sent up to ACU, and they asked me to give, it was the male nurse and that. He says, can you give me a pain score? And I said, 8 for my headache. He looked at me, he says, no, 5. I said, I'm telling you, a 8. He didn't believe until he took my blood pressure. And that's a real example. The blood pressure had indicated that I was actually in pain.
And we've also have, just anecdotally again, because we don't have strong data on this, as a Muslim community, we wash and bury our own dead. And I know that we have been burying a lot of babies and mothers over the years. And there are volunteers within our community who have attended women who are giving birth on their own. And they have been told to walk back to the ward when the attendance has challenged that, because they know that you usually go in a chair or on the bed. They have actually been told, well, they don't feel pain like us. That has been said in hospitals in Northern Ireland to mothers who have just given birth. It's not. This is a factual statement, but obviously, if we're not collecting the data, we can't chase up that. We just know from what's happening in the rest of the UK that this is an issue, but we need to be able to connect those dots here as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious I haven't got around to everybody else, and I think we could talk about. I just wanted to pick up on the issue there around the issue of paramilitarism, racism, sectarianism, and we see it most acutely in South Belfast, and I know a lot of you are based there as well. And it's really just this issue, and I've been in meetings with a lot of you over the years around the underreporting, the lack of confidence in the police, the lack of feedback in terms of what's happening with your case, and I just wanted to know, are you feeling reassured that this horrendous summer we've had will bring about changes in terms of how you are respected, engaged with, and that the perpetrators will be dealt with?
Not really.
Not really, okay.
No. We want to see the action, not the words.
Okay.
We've heard enough words, but we always hear enough words, beautiful words, lovely words, but they are just words. And when other communities in this country, well, they don't face similar issues, but historically have faced similar issues in terms of discrimination or sectarianism. When they cry, they are heard, and they are not given announcements and pretty words. Action takes place. Today, you have funding, Peace Plus funding, which looks at both these communities to make sure their needs are met. Those are not words, those are actions. When things happen in those communities which should not happen, institutions rally round, whether it be housing executive, PSNI, the legislature itself. They make sure that this is a problem, let's address it. However, when it comes to issues like Islamophobia, racism, racist bullying in schools, leave it up to the headmaster in that school to decide how he's going to. It's not a policy. But if that happened to a certain member from another community in this country, we now have integrated schools simply because those issues I'm talking about were taken on board. If something happened to one of them, there would be action, not words. So, sorry to ramble there, but the answer is no, we're not reassured.
Anybody else want to respond before I move on?
Just very quickly as well.
Yes.
During the riots, we had people who were approaching their local paramilitary leader and asking if they're going to be safe. So, we're not past that yet.
No, I know. I was dealing with a family got put out. Yeah, the police said we have to speak to the community leaders. I mean, it is disgusting. Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, Chair, may I add? I think there's a clear distinction in what we're talking about. Is if you look at, unfortunately, what happened in Southport, the whole country went into complete disarray. We have incidents, for example, like the Ian Huntley case and what happened to those 2 young ladies. And then we have other such incidences where there has been this type of, really disproportionate response.
The Bulger boy, was it? Bulger?
There's another young teenagers who decided to put a young turtle on the railway tracks, etc. But there wasn't a massive outpour and outcry of this nature. But as soon as it's somebody of color, all of a sudden they're a refugee or an asylum seeker. There has to be a negative connotation associated with color.
And the murder is suddenly more significant because it's committed by a person of color. Is murder just not murder?
Okay, Deputy Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming in. That was some really hard-hitting, significant stuff, but very important. And I think just when you're talking about what happened in Southport, I think something that really, really sat with me was how painful it must be for those families that the focus was not on the loss and the tragic loss of 3 little girls, but instead it turned to people destroying their own communities, turning on people, businesses and other families within their communities. I think that was the worst way across the country we could have possibly reacted to that atrocity. And the riots and the damage and attacks we saw in Belfast were obviously following on from that. And you've outlined some horrendous things that have happened, how your community hasn't felt safe, and it's so disappointing. And I am truly sorry as an elected rep for this place that was happening in Belfast. So it came out yesterday that there was nurses from Northern Ireland who'd been intimidated out of their house and moved to live in disused hospital accommodation with their children. Just so inappropriate for nurses who are working in our health service, are moved to such inappropriate accommodation with their children for months on end. And I think that really, I'd like you to speak wider to the support you feel you receive following those attacks from agencies such as the Housing Executive and the police. And I'd like to hear a bit more about how you feel and what could be improved there.
I was speaking about the family in Ballykelly. I actually met with the gentleman, his wife and child. His house was set fire out the front, and the Housing Executive decided to move them in the middle of the night to Ballykelly. Now he knows no one there, he has no support network, he's lost his job, there's nothing. He was totally flat because he didn't know what to do. The wife had lost contact with a few people that she knew and had a wee baby. The support isn't there. And even when they do attempt to move, there's no consideration where we're moving them to. Why would you move somebody from Belfast to Ballykelly? It's about the same thing happening. It's not a safe place. So eventually the communities had to come together and get them moved temporarily back to Belfast for their own safety. Is there a safe space where these people can go to when migrants or refugees or asylum seekers, when they're being attacked? Can the Housing Executive put a wee bit more consideration into relocating people? That's all we're asking.
The still relocation of the people with the Housing Executive, I probably haven't got an experience with the Housing Executive, but I've got a few incidents where I'm trying to help some of the families. One of the families recently I came across, they had a leak in their flat. They were in South Belfast, and they were accommodated in Limavady. And I'm thinking, does somebody really think a family with the kids, it's okay to move them from one side of the country to another side of the country? Does somebody just do some maths? Or it's just a random thing? You know what? We don't care. We were going to give you something, but it depends on us. We'll do a draw. There you go. It's a Limavady. There you go. It's a Londonderry. So there has to be some sort of system. As my colleagues have mentioned, there's a lot of red tapes when it comes to the immigrants, when it comes to, especially the immigrants, put it this way. For a white local person, those red tapes aren't there. But from outside world, it seems like we are getting a special treatment. Yes, we are getting a special treatment. You're right on that. But what kind of special treatment are we talking? We are getting inhuman treatments when nothing has been considered. Help of the organizations, as Tukra said, it'll be completely different criteria for us than comparing to another local organization. Housing executives, exactly same thing. Any sport you talk, this racism is everywhere. And sometimes people think it's okay because they don't complain. Yes, we do not complain. This is what I was saying about, that we do get that perk with us because we have a dark skin or different face features. But please don't do that. That somebody has to speak up. Nobody's listening to us, at least. So we are thankful you guys are giving us a chance, but you guys are the ones who are going to make a difference. Please do that.
The question was about how the Northern Ireland Housing Executive supports or not supports ethnic minorities, if I'm correct. I would have experience in this area in my personal life as well as in my professional life. So if you don't mind, I will give you both examples. Before I do, we need to accept that our institutions are institutionally racist. Before we proceed, we need to understand that, okay? And if our institutions are institutionally racist, that supports racist behaviors from individuals that are working for those institutions. So if we can understand that, we may well understand the examples I am about to give you. So the first example is there were two families in Mid-Antrim who came here on certificate of sponsorship visas, okay? Certificate of sponsorship visas are promoted by the government of this country during the COVID pandemic to support the NHS. Now, for somebody to get on a plane and come here on a certificate of sponsorship visa, they've paid exorbitant amounts of money to come here to serve your sick and infirm. That's number one. Number two, when these incidents happened to these individuals, when they contacted the Northern Ireland Housing Executive because they were on private rentals for support in a crisis, they were told the Housing Executive does not support them, that has no mechanisms in place to support them. However, the Home Office confirmed that those individuals that come to this country on certificate of sponsorship visas, which were extended by the invitations extended by the government of this country, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive has an obligation to those people. So this is why I began by saying, if an institution is already institutionally racist, it can only support the individual. I will elaborate. Some of you may know that in around April, May this year, in Finnegy, where I used to live, anti-immigrant posters went up, and in my personal, obviously they went up in front of my house, so personally I had a stake in the issue, but also as a community worker, I also had a stake in that, in speaking out against it, and as a father as well, because my children will see that signage. So having spoken out, certain people were not happy about that, and they painted over my house and intimidated me. Believe me, my experience in Northern Ireland, somebody painting on my house does not scare me. I've been through worse, much worse. Just giving you context. However, I was contacted by an individual in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive the day after the incident. And this was his question. Remember, this is somebody whose family has just been traumatized. At least my kids were traumatized. I wasn't, to be honest with you. I've been through worse. But the first question this individual asked me was, so are you moving out? So my question to him was, have you found me somewhere to go? Because I was on the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. By the way, the accommodation I was in, since before COVID, just at the start of COVID actually, 2019 December, it was emergency accommodation, right? I'd been stuck in there for 4 years with my 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. First question he asked me, are you moving out? I said, well, have you found me an alternative place? Then he said, no. Then I said, so I'm not going anywhere. To which he dropped the phone, called me back about 2 hours later and said, the landlord wants you out by 5 o'clock. Okay? Remember this happened to me and my kids the day before. Now I'm being told the landlord wants you out by 5 o'clock. I asked why. What have I done to the landlord? He said, because you're bringing too much attention to his property and it's going to rise his insurance. So I said, well, my kids are still at school and I don't have 600 or 700 pounds lying around for me to just suddenly go and find a new place to go. So, I'm not going anywhere. So for the next 3 to 4 days, I actually attended a meeting with Paula where this individual phoned me during that meeting, right? Forgot to mention. He found me a house in the village. In front of the house that I was supposed to move in after being intimidated in Finnegie, there was the same sign. Instead of saying landlords in Finnegie, it said landlords in the village. That's where this individual in the housing executive thought it was appropriate to move me during a time of crisis. So, again, I go back to the issues that I spoke about earlier, about cultural competency, okay? And having individuals with the know-how to do their job, trauma-informed approach. I was listening to some of the deliberations in the hearing before this, okay, reconciliation, etc., etc. Those individuals receive a trauma-informed approach, do they not? So, because you're brown, can you not be approached with a trauma-informed approach? Because in most cases, we are not. When the PSNI comes to take your statement after your windows have just been kicked in, they're not sensitive to the fact that culturally, linguistically, you may be on a different spectrum from them. All they want to do is just get their job done. So here, you contact the hate crime advocacy agent. This is their number. This is how the police deal with you here. Now, I understand historically there's a reason for that, because the police themselves and their engagements with the local community have been very tense. This is only part of the UK where you have Land Rovers with all kinds of armor on them and all. So I understand that. However, as things change, you also upgrade your information, you upgrade your training, you upgrade your competency. There doesn't seem to be a desire in this country to do that for certain sections of our community, of which it's a very small, very tiny, in terms of statistics, 135,000 ethnic minorities, whether it be, this is from the last census, and many of those are not working because they're children, and many of them are elderly, but they're taking all the houses and they're taking all the jobs from 2 million Irish people. My issue with the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, my organization's issue, is one which is very, very concerning, because it's not only an institution that is institutionally racist, but they have individuals in that organization that are racist and carrying out those jobs to support people when they are not supporting people. So they denied that they were able to help those 2 families in Antrim, and the Home Office actually had a different story. So we need clarification from these institutions as well, because many of these institutions, when you walk into them, they have all kinds of flowery statements about inclusion, diversity, and equity, and how their policies are adhering to this. But on the ground, their staff don't know those policies or practice those policies. And so people suffer because of this.
I have a list of people to bring in to Cara. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm saying I have a list of people to come in. Can I just move on? Sorry, Carol, go ahead, please.
First of all, I just want to say solidarity. I represent North Belfast, but I was on the Ormer Road with Deirdre Hargy later that Saturday when her and residents prevented some of the fascists, that's what they are, from trying to get to one of the Islamic centres. And I know Deirdre was there, and as was Claire and Paula and many others. But the issue for us is there's certain things that just have asked for which have been held up. So we need to find out where the blockages are in terms of the racial equality strategy and hate crime legislation to get that moved on. But one practical suggestion is that this committee is doing an inquiry into gaps in equality So the whole data collection aspect, that would be something, because you're right, Section 75 is there for a reason, but the outworking of it actually causes inequality. So we need to sort that out. All I can say is, and it's not to contradict what you're saying, but I'm dealing with constituents who've been made homeless and they live in North Belfast and they're now moved up to Portrush or Limavady. And it isn't your fault that there's a housing crisis. It's years of not investing. It's not your fault. There's a health crisis, again, years of underinvesting. And we could go on through every ill in society, but fundamentally there is racism and it needs called out. And there absolutely is racism. And there are people who are putting signs up in communities to intimidate and make sure that nobody who's brown or black can live there. I mean, that's the message that I get when I see it. So, and thankfully I'm not in an area that I represent, because if I seen a sign like that, I would personally take it down. So, it's just to say that. In addition to the legislation, we can certainly, even through meetings with parties that have already done it, but raise with the PSNI again about the responses and making sure that there's appropriate resources there, because there are concerns in every community that there aren't enough resources of PSNI to deal with everything that you're experiencing, but you have got the additional and the intimidatory practices of racism and fascism to deal with, which is life-threatening. So certainly can raise that. And just to say, and it may be only words, but any time that fascism raises its head, I'd certainly be on the street and protest against it. So, and anything we can do in this committee, I'm sure people here, despite differences, will try and do their best. You mentioned the term reasonable concerns. That just grinds my gears, I'll be frank. I don't know what reasonable concerns means at all. Are there reasonable concerns around housing and health and jobs? That's the case for everybody, regardless what colour you're in. But I'm not going to try and explain what so-called reasonable concerns are with people of colour, or religion, or ethnicity, or gender, who decide to make a certain place their home. I'm not going to try and explain that. So it's just to say I'm not dodging the question, just not explaining it because I don't agree with them. So thank you.
Barry, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you so very much. Just one question. Prior to the summer of 2024, did you feel like you were a full integrated part of society, and did you feel like before all this that you were able to live without fear? The simple answer would be no. These things have been there for years, and as I said before, and this is probably the third time I'm saying exactly the same thing, that the things which a normal person would consider racist here, we might not consider it as a racist because we are immune to it. We think that's all right, I'm not going to make a fuss out of all these things. But yes, during that summer 2024, we have seen a different face of Northern Ireland. Yes, having said that, I would like to appreciate the people who came out in the solidarity as well. That was a big slap on some of these far from rights. So that is the only positive one I see now. I've asked some other platforms the questions to these very people who are after or maybe are always responsible of these things. Like we had our centre burned twice. Like first time nearly burned to the ground. And the second time when we had it all repaired, done, we were given the keys on Wednesday. Friday evening, burnt again. And my question to those people was, is it helping Northern Ireland? If this is your own house, this is your own home, you're burning your own home, you're in the news again. I mean, the news of the BMCA building being burned, it was worldwide. It was in Washington Post. It was from very far east, from the countries where I hardly hear from, like Israel, Middle East, Far East. It was all over the media. And I'm thinking, is it helping the local economy? Is it helping your tourism? Is it helping the businesses? Is it helping your foreign investment we are begging for? No, it's not. So the clear answer and the short answer is no, but the things got worse over this summer period.
Short answer, no. And the reason why is because people feel entitled to treat you a certain way because you are different. And the reason why people feel entitled to do that is because of the messaging that comes from their politicians and from their leaders and from the heads of government. So I would like you, Harry, to imagine if you were catching a train from Finnegy into Belfast. It's like less than 10 minutes. But imagine if when you're on that train, a group of 5 young people, probably between 15 and 16, the 15 and 18. I'm a middle-aged man. What am I going to do with 5 strong, virile young men deciding to attack me just because I'm sitting there quietly being black? You know? So the security people on the train feel it's none of my business that this guy is getting attacked. And that's because society tells him that it's not his business. And those kids attack people like me and these ladies and my brother because they feel entitled, because society tells them it's okay to attack them, because if you attack them, you won't get arrested. You won't even get a fine. There will be no repercussions. So we don't feel safe, we feel aware. We always have to be aware. Always. Even if you're going into a takeaway. I was going to a takeaway shop a couple of weeks ago. And as I was walking in, this young man says to me, I had my hair tied up that day, which I do sometimes. And he says, "What's that, your hair?" And I was like, well, you've just answered yourself. Then he goes, "Why are you talking to me like that?" Now, I'm talking the way I'm talking now, and he was talking that way. But because he's entitled to talk to me that way, he feels, you should answer me properly. And this was a boy young enough to be my own son, okay? But they feel entitled enough to speak to us and treat us that way. So no, we don't feel safe here. We feel aware, and we have to be aware, and we have to make our children aware. And if our parents visit us, we also have to make our parents aware that this is how it is, because people will watch you get abused, people will watch you get stoned, beaten, and they'll act like nothing is happening. It happened to me in 2006 on the Newton Ards Road, beaten in broad daylight on Christmas Eve in front of CCTV cameras. No convictions up to today, no arrest up to today. That was 2006. I told you, painting on my house. You're just decorating my house when you do that, because I've been through worse.
Well, if I may,
Yeah, one of the ladies would like to respond. Go ahead, Laurie.
I was going to say, from the point of view as culturally, we deal with conflict in a very different way. If we do decide to go to war about something and really physically attack each other, that's the last line of defense for us. And we are taught before we leave our own homes to have a very clear sense of self and how we're very different. I never imagined that in 2024 I have to sit down, my daughter, my niece, my nephew, and everyone else, and explain that if you're going to be bullied in school, you have to tell me, because if you retaliate on your own, you will be called a tout. That's the sort of language, or worse.
Aggressive.
And whenever you're responding to something, you're angry. But you've got to understand, I'm constantly trying to suppress my own natural instinctive response that allows me to have the freedom to react. So we're constantly having to talk ourselves down from, don't raise your voice, don't be angry, don't seem intimidating, don't seem this, because what happens? George Floyd happens. You have a knee on your neck and you die. I do not want to see what America has become turn into what Northern Ireland is becoming, because it seems excusable that law enforcement or anyone can have firearms or do anything to any one of us at any point in time, and there's no repercussion for it. I don't want any young person of color to feel intimidated to be on the streets at any point in time. And if we retaliate as parents, there's a whole big issue of legislation that we have to bring to the table simply because we have to know the law. Some of us here know the law enough that we can quote the human rights, we can quote all sorts of things, and you cannot really say much to us. What happens to somebody who looks like me, who's completely defenseless? It's worse. So we're concerned because what sort of individuals are we allowing our children to become? So I think no is the right answer. And I think, sadly, we've all had to maybe be eluding ourselves to think that we're safe, because Summer definitely told us that what we've always suspected to be true is in actual fact the reality. It is true.
We're getting to the nub of everything. So, ladies, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think two things. Number one, no, because if you look at the legislation, if you look at the way we structure almost everything in society, it's CNR, PLR, sorry, you know the acronyms, and other. And the trouble with being the other, so all of our children were born in Northern Ireland, all of our children will be considered other, all of our children are growing up in a society in which they don't fit into the two boxes. And we literally have, you know, it's in legislation, and even like things like when you do employment, the employment reports that come out every year, they just take out 20% of the population, that's another, and then, oh look, we've got 50-50, as if we just don't exist. We're like the invisible people in legislation, in reports. You just take them out and do the two communities and just forget those 20% or, you know, in the workforce, and you take them out of the schools, take them out whatever report you're doing, because we need to compare these communities. So that it's institutionalised. But also, I think we've all had conversations with our kids. We've had them before the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have had to explain, why is the mosque on the TV? Why is BMCA on fire? We've had to explain to our kids already. My child, when she was, my eldest child, she's now 12, when she was 3, she was in a photograph of our Eid celebrations, and she's 3 years old. And I had to go to the police because the comments were, burn them, bomb them, kill them, get them out. That was the comments on the photograph of my child. And can you imagine going into a station? I broke down in the station in front of my daughter, who's like, she was in a wee pink tutu and she's dancing around. No concept at that age. You know, I'm from here, I've got Northern Irish accent. When I see the scarf, they assume I'm foreign. I've been told to go home. I've been told to speak English while I'm in the park with my children.
Speaking English.
Maybe it's the County Antrim accent, I don't know. But, you know, we have had these conversations at a young age. And when this happened in the summer, I wanted to protect my child. I wanted to say, you know, this didn't happen. But my child is going into secondary school. I need to have a conversation with her to say, don't stand in front of your school. You need to stand at the front door or wait in your form. And that's the conversation we've had this year. I will pick you up at the school gate. You will not walk around to the side and stand beside, because I don't know who's going to drive past. And whenever this all broke out, again, you think you can hide it. You think you can not talk about it. She had to go to an orthodontist appointment. I'm sitting in there. I had to have a conversation with her on the way. I was trying to roughly explain what was happening. Sitting in the seat, you know, waiting to go in the waiting room. It's on the news. And there's a politician telling people that the Muslims are a threat. Muslims are a fifth column. Muslims are ruining our society. How do you explain that to your 12-year-old who's very proud of her Muslim identity? And that's the politician on TV, on mainstream media, let alone the riots. You know, let's leave that aside. The narratives that we have been allowed. I've been on the radio and people come in, phone in saying my children don't have the right to vote or shouldn't have the right to vote on the future of Northern Ireland and things like that. Why? Because they have mixed heritage, because they're Muslim. And all of us have had those lived experiences, and pretty much everyone in our community will have an experience, and our children will have those lived experiences. And that's what's the most painful thing about all of this.
To answer your question, I had to put a lot of thought in it, because I'm thinking not only as a member of Northwest Migrant Forum, as a mother and grandmother. And none of us is safe until all of us is safe. And we have made a deliberate, myself and my family, a deliberate effort to integrate. And my son is now engaged to an Irish. I have a mixed race grandchild. It doesn't mean that they're safe, because we all feel the pain when one of us is in pain. That's the only way I can explain it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Brian, please. Thank you.
Look, thank you for your attendance today and for everything that you've presented to us. And somebody I've met previously. I did work actually for Ford South for a couple of years there, not so long ago. Certainly the events of this summer have been shocking for everyone, and how the killings in Southport were exploited by people with an agenda, to an anti-Muslim agenda and then an anti-immigrant agenda. And there's a wider context to that. It happened across the UK, it's happened down south, it's happened in Europe, so it's not just here, but we've never seen it so bad here. So it brought all that into focus. I do feel there's almost a battle. I've seen it before happening where there's allegations made about some incident, and people will falsely say it was a foreign national, it was somebody of coloured skin, and whether that's true or not, quite often it's not true, but it ends up with protests. So there's people who are looking at opportunities with a racist agenda, undoubtedly, to exploit things. So that battle is going on. So for people, I do listen to people. So for people who say, look, I'm not going to listen to your concerns, that's actually not helpful. It's important that I listen to everyone's concerns. I will weigh up what they're saying. I would say I will engage with you if you have concerns about housing. If you've other concerns that you want to raise, I will at least listen to those, but I will weigh them up. So we have seen this summer with the, if you call them anti-immigrant protests, and then the counter-protests, wider issues brought into it, which actually hasn't been helpful. So some of the counter-protests end up as anti-Israel protests, anti-Israel elements to it, by BDS, and that's actually not helping if you're going to have what essentially is anti-Semitism brought into a protest, So as I said, that's about other issues. If it's just meant to be a counter-protest, well, you can see the example of this, where other political issues are being brought in, and that's another example of exploitation. But it is a problem we have. I often talk to groups. I mean, you only have to look at the census figures. Northern Ireland, 2001 to 2011, the number of people who were born outside the UK and Ireland living here doubled to 2001 to 2011, and doubled again to 2021. And the number of people self-identification as their racial background is non-white doubled and doubled again. So society is changing. Some people are struggling to cope with that change, and there has to be a challenge to that. But there also has to be an effort for that social integration of working together in society, that we are here as one society, but there's different elements to it. So I do put effort into that, but I don't dismiss. If people want to raise concerns, I will listen to them, but I will say to people, look, society, there is change happening. If you think you can live in a society, an area that's all white, that's not going to happen in the modern era. Vast majority of people who are coming here are working. If you look at, if you're in hospital, if you're in a care home, I don't want to stereotype, but particularly in those sectors, if you look around you at who's working, who's contributing to society, and proudly being here. So I just do see it as a struggle for the attitude setters, and it's important that the voice of inclusion and tolerance is strong, and those that want to promote intolerance, that there is a counterweight to that. So that's a struggle I see myself involved in. And in terms of funding, it's important not to make it about other issues, with respect about which groups get funding and so on. I mean, that's down to applications, and it's important that all groups are supported. But as I say, to keep the focus on what the issue is about trying to get society to work together and having that involvement, so that we can have that inclusion. But it's an issue for TEO, and it's the bigger issue now for our society. It's almost overtaken our own sectarian divide.
We want to go ahead, Laurie. Go ahead.
The only thing I would probably say, Brian, if you don't mind, is it's if we could swap places, maybe you would better understand what it feels like to be me. Because it's very, very difficult. I will never presume to tell you how it is to be white. I would even if I could tell you stories that I assume wouldn't be relevant, it's not the case. And what we have is a lot of people with the will to do all the right things, which is wonderful. But the fundamental part is, let's have this conversation where you understand where I'm coming from, what you mean when you say what you say, and what I'm experiencing. Because the discrepancy systematically is because the system is broken because it looks at things through one lens, whereas it needs to look at things through a multiple lens. So if we're going to talk about health, let's try and get as many voices around the room so that if we're creating a policy, it's robust enough to cover everything as much as we can. And even if we do have some things missing, we can learn from the things that we miss and improve it as we go along. And I think that's what we're concerned about, that we've been going on for so long. And I completely respect that Northern Ireland has its own history. But we've now got other individuals from different backgrounds that are adding on top of what is your Good Friday Agreement. Personally, I think the Good Friday Agreement is an incomplete document, but that's a personal conversation. That's my own view. Because I think, to me, the Good Friday Agreement is the equivalent of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. It's the same aspiration, two different jurisdictions, and the whole aim is for a society that sees each other as equals, but makes room for each other equitably. And I think that's what we're asking for. And I appreciate all of you having to sit in this room and listen to what we have to say. It's an uncomfortable sit down, because it's hard for us to sit in front of you and tell you what we hear and experience and try to articulate that without wanting to offend you, but needing you to invite you into our space so that collectively we can find a way that Northern Ireland be the truest reflection of every single person in this place, because we're all ambassadors of Northern Ireland when we leave here. So it's how can I do that? And I look at you and know that I have your support. And where there is things we do not understand about each other, there is room to sit down and have a conversation and get to that resolution that says, here's the problem. Now, how do we fix that now that we found it? Because it's not about you personally. Society has been designed in such a way that it makes us enemies of each other. And both Northern Ireland and the majority of the people who live in this country, we're living off of the colonial past that has a divide and rule mentality. So we're still living in a system that's very colonially minded as opposed to being realistic to where we are today. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I take umbrage to something you said, Brian, when you said that funding is a different issue. We are talking about supporting people. We are talking about supporting people's lives, not only people who are being racially abused, but just support in general. So when we look at the government of Northern Ireland, it has a department for communities, right? For communities. It is funded to support those communities. So if communities that are marginalized are telling you that they are marginalized in terms of funding, and then you tell us that that's a separate issue, my brother, that's a bit concerning.
Another question, Brian? Is that you finished?
No,
that wasn't a question. I was just commenting.
No, you're commenting back. No, I'm just saying. Sometimes I'll hear groups arguing about other groups getting funding, and I'm just saying that's rather than identify certain groups and say why are they getting funding and why am I not. I don't think it's not necessarily fair on the other groups.
I'm going to bring Emma in now, but I just wanted to raise the issue around the TU officials coming and to look back at what happened to 2015 to 25 when they said they were going to look at the Minority Ethnic Development Fund and how it was going to be more accessible. So that's certainly an issue that we will raise with the departmental officials, because I know exactly what you're talking about, representing South Belfast in terms of where the funding goes. Go ahead, Emma.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you all. To be honest, I don't know where to start. I could probably spend another hour talking about this. So just firstly, appreciate all of your testimony and the fact that you've all came here and been so honest, and I really appreciate that. I want to make reference, I watched the documentary last night that was on TV in Takura. I found your input incredibly interesting around the comments that you made around people who were coming here to work and how they were providing a workforce that wouldn't otherwise be here, and the comments you made, Mohammed. But I want to, I suppose, I hear that all the time. You don't just have legitimacy here because you contribute. And I feel like that is often maybe very well-intentioned, well-meaning people trying to hit back at blatant racism say that. And I feel like it's almost not helpful, because even if somebody isn't a nurse or a porter or a cook or whatever, they're still a human being. And we all have the right to a life free from intimidation and violence. And I know people mean well when they say that, but it frustrates me, because, you know, you shouldn't have to prove that you are contributing financially in order to be guaranteed that you're not going to be subject to harassment. I also, in terms of the conversation around the counter protests, and obviously during the summer we were involved in a lot of them, and during those there were emblems brought on of the Palestinian flag and all of that. None of these things can be taken in isolation. You know, if we're going to talk about racism properly, and you made very interesting and I feel very important comments about institutional racism in this part of the world, and how that it is inbuilt into our structures. It absolutely is. That, like the presentation that we had before this around, you know, dealing with the history of the conflict here, and I was talking about a case of a man that was murdered in 1997, and we found out earlier this year that up to 25 state agents were involved in that, and we still don't have. All of those things are linked, and it is all because of colonialism and imperialism, and we have to, you know, we can't, to me, we cannot properly address any of those things in isolation if we're not going to tackle the elephant in the room and talk about it holistically, and say, you know, it's not just enough to say, oh, I condemn racism. You have to actually look at what causes it and properly call it out if we're going to target it and mean that it doesn't happen. And I wouldn't profess to have any of the experience that you're talking about, because I am a privileged woman in this situation and I have never experienced that, and I don't have fear coming out of my own front door. But I suppose all I can say to you is I really appreciate what you have done here today, and I think it has been so powerful, and any solidarity that we can provide your way, and obviously following up with the department, and we need to see these things properly tackled and addressed. And I suppose they're just words, but sometimes I feel like that's all I can do is through words talking to people. And my last thing, during the summer we seen people, so-called patriots, marching behind an Irish tricolour and using horrible language and horrible threatening things, and I just want to say that was not in my name. And I find it disgusting that any person that calls themselves an Irish person would carry out the same sort of racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia that we've seen this summer. It is not acceptable, and I distance myself wholeheartedly from it, and that's all I have to say, and thank you so much. Thanks, Chair.
Timothy, go ahead, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for coming along today. Certainly been very useful to hear your contributions firsthand. And on the day of the Stormont recall, you know, I was very clear from the beginning. Condemn all racism, condemn all violence, condemn any type of murder, anything that's happened in this country. There should be no air given to it and no place given to it. But there's a couple of points I would like to pick up with you. And Naomi, you had mentioned the term legitimate concerns, and that was a term I did use when I was speaking in Stormont. So I want to, I suppose, grasp that, because it was obviously in reference to myself.
Actually, just you. I was there at the chamber, but it wasn't just you. Well, it's been said in several statements by other people as well.
So I'm not going to duck that. People do have, in my term, I do believe, legitimate concerns, but that doesn't take away, like, any of the violence or any of the thuggery that went on is wrong, and that is so counterproductive to any concerns that anybody has in this society. So I don't want you to conflate them two issues, and labelling people as far right because they have concerns is wrong.
But labelled anyway.
No, I'm not saying, but I'm just in general, in this topic, since the summer, that's what people have been doing. If somebody has expressed some sort of a concern, oh, they're far right. And the Chief Police Commissioner from the Isle of Wight, I thought was very apt when she came out and she was talking about Southport, that you have to get to the root of the problem that's causing this to try and deal with it, to move on, and that's what we need to do. to go with. And it's good to have this conversation today to open that space. Because if you don't listen to a section in society, you know, it breeds this, and then it comes to the boiling point that we have seen in the summer. And no way is that condemning any of the violence or any of the racist attacks that you have suffered. And I don't want to be associated with any of that, because it's not my nature, not me. But like Brian has mentioned, there's people that do come to us with concerns, and we have to work with them. I do have to take exception. You talk about institutional, you know, racism that exists, and you singled out the housing executive, and I think that was unfair that you let that go unchallenged. Because I don't, any of my dealings with the housing executive, I don't believe that's the case.
What's your ethnic origin, sir?
Well, you know, by...
No, I don't, sir. I'm asking you, what is your ethnic
I'm
origin?
35 years old, been born and bred in Gloryford in North Antrim. That's where I've come. And I'm not...
So you're Caucasian? That's what I'm asking. I'm asking a direct question, what your ethnic makeup is.
You know, when I sign the forms, I class myself as white British.
Okay, so you wouldn't have any of the experience of institutional racism that I'm mentioning because of your ethnic... So you cannot discount something you've never experienced simply because you can't experience it.
The people that come in through my office that I've been helping regarding right to leave, right to remain, all different requests. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what you singled out the housing executive. So it doesn't matter if it's yourself or somebody living in Cullybecky and Bandside. If there's no houses and they have to go in temporary accommodation, you know, that's a Northern Ireland-wide search, and that person is placed. It could be anywhere in Northern Ireland. It could be in Enniskillen, it could be in Limavady, it could be Portrush, it could be in Belfast. And I think it's unfair picking up on the housing executive.
But I didn't single out the housing executive. I mentioned the PSNI, I mentioned the Home Office, I mentioned the housing executive when I was speaking in the context of institutional racism. So I did not single them out. There was a question which the chair directed, which was about the housing executive, and I answered to that within that context of housing executive. That's why when she asked the question, I spoke about it. But when I mentioned institutional racism earlier in my, what do you call it? My opening remarks, I mentioned several institutions, sir. So
in any of the institutions, something I haven't experienced, and I haven't experienced that.
Wouldn't, because you're white.
But like,
no, not only the white.
I work with.
Can I just challenge him on his lived experience? He's here to give testimony.
I'm not challenging.
You are.
Well, that's not my experience. So what?
Yes,
so
it's his.
There's different people come through.
Excuse me, sorry.
It's a statutory agency that's doing a dishonour just calling them out like that. There's many people live in the house or work in the housing executive.
Excuse me, I'm in the chair. I'd like you to stop. I just wanted to bring Naomi in, please. We are here, as Emma said, to hear about lived experience. It is us as scrutineers to possibly bring the housing executive in and put that accusation to them. But I am never going to challenge if somebody is individually coming here to give testimony. We will listen to them and then we will take it to the relevant authorities. That is the role of us as a scrutiny committee. Naomi, go ahead.
I just want to reread a part of what I said earlier. We do not want to be used as a political football or a fig leaf for political feelings elsewhere. I just want to repeat that before I continue. So I just want to continue. Okay. So when I'm talking about legitimate concerns, I'm talking about in the context of a situation where people were putting up posts on social media saying that they need to protect the Christian West. We haven't declared war. I have not declared war on anyone. That we have to march to the Belfast Islamic Centre in order to, I think one of the phrase was basically tell them they're not welcome.
That's wrong, and that's
so
not my name.
And I understand that, so I'm not attacking you. I'm not here to attack you. Okay, that phrase was not directed at you. I heard it on many different platforms from many different people. It was not you specifically, although it was not in the chamber. But so whenever you're talking about legitimate concerns, you need to be very clear to that. Housing is a real problem in Northern Ireland. The health service is a real problem in Northern Ireland. Impacts us all. I'm waiting on appointments for my children. I'm sure many people in this room. So when someone comes to you, your job as a politician, I'm happy to have a conversation with you after this about my community, about what it's like to be Muslim, about my faith, if that's an issue, so that when someone comes to you and says, I'm worried about these Muslims taking over, you can answer in a responsible way and say they're not taking over. they're only this percentage of the population. Just because there are Muslims who have committed crimes, there are Christians who have committed crimes, there are people who are connected with the political parties in Northern Ireland who have committed crimes, but we don't hold an entire group responsible for the crimes of one or two people. And that's really, really key. That's where it differs between us. And also we have lessons. We all come from different countries, we all come from different ethnic backgrounds, different religions. We all know each other and we all work together. I just came from an interfaith lunch where the rabbi was there, there was different Buddhist, there was Hindu. We all work together a lot of the time in Northern Ireland. We have something to teach you about working together from different backgrounds and different ethnicities. So I'm just saying, talk to us, speak to us. And when someone do have legitimate, because housing is a legitimate concern, health is a legitimate concern, but it's not my fault. It's not Takura's fault. It's not Laurie's fault. It's not Mohammed's fault.
Sorry. I'm just going to say something very quickly. We have a couple of decisions to make at the end of the meeting, so we need quorums, which is 5 for just a quorum. So just before people start disappearing off, go on ahead. I'll give you one question after Mohammed speaks, and then we'll try to wrap up in 2 minutes. Okay? Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just tell you one thing? That do you think we like sitting here now? Do you think we like telling you our stories? Because this is what message I am getting here now. Honestly, this is what I'm getting. Because if you give me 1 minute, please. I know that some of the flags we mentioned earlier, but there were Pakistani flag there as well. Why did you just see Palestine flag only? If you are just choosing to see one flag and not others, because there were people from different backgrounds, right? It was all about the immigrants. It was all about, okay, if I go out, I can proudly say, or maybe if you allow me to say, I'm from Northern Ireland. I've left you the question, when I become Northern Ireland, please let me know, because I would like to class myself Northern Irish. Up until now, I am Pakistani, right? And if I go anywhere, I'm proudly represent Pakistani as well. I have got Pakistan Consul Journal bringing their whole system every 3 months to help the Pakistani community in my office, which we used to go to Glasgow or London, right? So in that way, if I take my Pakistani flag out, if anybody has a problem, then I would have a problem with your Northern Irish flag, but I don't. So to address this there. Secondly, there's a one thing it's a political thing, and I'm debating myself, should I say it or should I hold it, right? We are all victims of colonialism by British people, right? You came to us. This is what I'm talking to Britain, Great Britain. You came to us. We followed you back. We wouldn't have.
Was great.
No. They stole from us. The resources were drained for 300 years from Southeast Asia. And now you're thinking why people are coming on those boats? You're responsible for that. Be responsible for those things. There's nothing great in Britain now if you can't accept us, because we accepted you. We let you rule us. And you're not even letting us to live in this country.
Okay. You want another question? Go ahead. And then Laurie, I know you want to come back in. Timothy, and then Laurie, and then we'll wrap it.
I just want to pick up on your point regarding funding and the likes of the Botanic Festival. It's not reflective, or it's not where you want to see the money going. Obviously, any public money has to be fulfilled and fulfill certain criteria. The takeaway that I want to get from today is, how would you like to see money channeled into the areas that it's most needed? Or do you need to set up new community groups to try and bring that funding in? Or how do you envisage that the money that's being spent being utilised and being better used?
Go ahead, Laurie. Yeah.
One of the things I could say, and maybe Chair, is perhaps we need another seating with you where we can break it down to you, perhaps what we mean by institutional racism. Because I think there's some elements of that we could debate backwards and forwards. So if we can have an opportunity where we can show you what anti-racist actually is versus not racist, there's a huge fundamental difference even when we're looking at that. With regards to what you're talking about, Timothy, I think one of the key things is, if you're going to have a funding and it's specifically for diverse ethnic communities, How many individuals sit in the decision panel who come from those communities to make the decision that this is a relevant piece of work that goes along with the good relations agreements that we have, that goes against, the Belfast agenda, that celebrates the Good Friday Agreement, that looks at Section 75 and all of that. I think there's a famous phrase here, nothing about me without me. So if we're going to look at things and there's enough representation around the table on the decision, I don't think there would be any objections. The problem is it's too top heavy, one specific group of individuals, such that it's gate kept a certain way.
Yeah.
And anybody else who falls outside of that is at a disadvantage because they're not in the club. So if you had to put this in a clubhouse, this is the executive guys who go to the golf course and have a brilliant time, and everyone else, you would rather see me as the caddy all the time. But you cannot see me being another person playing golf alongside you. If I have to give you a visual analogy, all we're literally saying is, if I can afford to pay my way and be a member of the club, let me be a member of the club. That's essentially what we're asking for.
Thank you. I will work with the clerk and the deputy chair, and we'll see how we can bring you back, maybe just off the back of what the TU officials do. But thank you all so much. Really appreciate it, not just today, but everything that you do for our city and our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I'll try and rattle through these last pieces of business quite quickly. So, in terms of the consultation summary, there's information in your packs. Delighted with the number of responses, 124, 22 written. We are going to shift into the forward work programme a bit. We were meant to have a session next week where the institutions were going to come and talk to us about their contributions to the redress.
In the letter.
Yeah. So far we've only one, and that's Bernardo's, and they, as we know, are straight out with their payments and stuff. So we, along with the clerk, we are looking at how we can compel them to come. So what I'm going to suggest is that next week, instead of that session, we will still bring the, thank you again, what we will still do is a session on the HIA Redress Board, because that took a wee bit of time. Thank you, Takira. That took a bit of time, but we will also then look at the first protected group, one of the main protected groups under equality, and that's around age. So we'll have the Children's Commissioner, we'll have Older People's Commissioner, hopefully if they've got availability, and those so if you're okay, we'll change that around, and we'll look at the we'll use one of our hours next week for the equality inquiry. So loads of correspondence this week, and thank you to the clerk and his staff for processing that and stuff. Is there anything anybody would like to raise within the correspondence?
You've covered it. I just seen the letter from a solicitor and thought, thanks very much, but I don't agree. Yeah. So yeah.
We will look at how we can compel them, and we've been looking at the whole issue of all island religious orders, and that they can't hide behind the fact that they maybe have their headquarters in Dublin. If they operated here, they should be here. Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting there, but I just would like a quick word with everybody just after. Go ahead.
The forward work load. I made a
right.
request earlier on if the ICRIR
Yes.
could come back, if we could pen that in. There's a couple of victims groups that I had met with in the last 2 weeks, and if they could have consideration, Ulster Human Rights Watch and South East Fermanagh Foundation, I think would be very beneficial to come in front of the committee.
Definitely. I think where are we at with the draft strategy on victims and survivors? We could possibly look at getting the TO officials in for that. Listen to them first, and maybe some others on the panel, and then bring the TO officials in. I think we're always about how.
And we can bring other groups, because what we don't need to do is put one victims group against another.
Okay.
That should be facilitated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound.